Okay.
Attention, please.
Yo. 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 Yo.
What's going on, everyone? It's David Palmer, Leo King, and Dr. Ann Wohlcke here for History in the Stars to start 2025 off. It's good to be with you. We're here on highvibe.tv, and we got a great episode today, especially with some of the world events happening that are very interesting, that are correlating back to Pluto that just, of course, made its ingress into Aquarius. How's it going, Ann? How are you in 2025?
I'm still doing great in 2025 and still here despite the winds and fires of California.
Right.
We haven't blown away over here, and luckily the fires aren't hitting us where we are right now. But I know we have a lot of viewers, a lot of people who follow you are in the areas that are hit by the fires right now. So
A lot.
we're definitely thinking about them and hoping the best for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, we're kind of used to it here in California. We are the Wild West people. Behind us, of course, is John Wayne Airport, and everybody seems to be okay. But it has been a very, part of the history of California, whether it's wildfires or it's earthquakes, people have come out this way for the adventure or to be a star. There's a lot of price that comes with that. It's not a very stable place when it comes to the history of California, whether it's oil that's here or it's every kind of idea of some sort of, you know, whether it's natural disasters. But I also feel like California has a really tough tenacity with it that gets through the weird stuff. Sucks about the homes and the fires, but it is, for people that don't understand, Santa Ana winds are something that happen year round, and when they come in, it's weird because it takes all the moisture away, and they come from the deserts, from Arizona, from all up, and bring just hot, dry air down here at 80 miles an hour. So it's the perfect way to light it up, I guess.
And meanwhile, you see on TV, if you watch any of the coverage, the Californians are just like, yeah, that guy's house just burned down, or I'm having to leave my house right now.
Yeah.
We're always so calm and just
I know.
like, well, I guess it's a fire this week. But
Well, if you notice too, all those people had to ditch all their cars, and it's so California, it was just nothing but Teslas, BMWs, and Mercedes, and then they were just pushing them out of the way. I was like, well, that's California for you. But it is quite interesting time because I feel like this is a subject we've covered, but the events that have transpired to start 2025, the conversations that are being in public with world leaders, to upcoming world leaders, to just the ideas that are being talked about are very, I feel like we've actually put them off as, we've put them in other shows as possibilities, but it's almost like kind of interesting whether it happens or not, that these are talks that are happening in public about, really it comes down to monarchy and republic again. And that's not the conversation I think that's really being talked about yet when it comes to liberating the United Kingdom, without saying monarchy, but liberating them for freedom means getting rid of the monarchy, or making Canada the 51st state is also connected to the English crown. So what are your feelings about that, just in general, hearing these things that are in the public that are being talked about, and the fight between the United Kingdom Prime Minister and Elon Musk and Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, stepping down, the Governor General taking over, which is the closest to the king, never the Prime Minister, the Governor General, if you're in Canada or Australia.
Yeah, I think all of this is pretty interesting. It's been such a wild time for news and everything that's going on. You know, some of the things like whether Canada is going to be the 51st state, which we'll see. Maybe I'm laughing now, but who knows? The Greenland thing, those things I think we need to wait until. I think there's been a lot of, we talked about this on our last show, there's been a lot of fear about what's going to happen. And there's a lot of discourse out there that's trying to get people anxious and maybe thrown off of the track of other things happening. I don't know. But I think that all of this that's coming up right now with free speech and what's happening with Elon Musk versus the British government, and then Mark Zuckerberg's statement that came out, I think it was today, right?
Yep. Or it was yesterday,
yes.
yes.
Yeah, because you had sent me, I sent you a text and said, hey, what are we going to talk about? And you sent the Elon Musk, one of his tweets. I keep saying texts. I mean, when Elon Musk's tweets, you sent me one of his, or two of them from yesterday. And I had been looking at that and thinking about it too. But I kept thinking to myself, well, but there's not really any connection between the astrology and these issues of freedom of the press that had come up in the years leading up to the American Revolution. Because I had been thinking we're going to look at something to do with March of 1778. I don't know why I thought that we'd be looking at where Pluto was. So when I came in today, I said, well, did anything happen in 1732 in the astrology? Because that was the big date that I came in wanting to talk about for today that I think really connects to everything else that's going on right now. Well, and you said something I was surprised and shocked by and thought, oh, well, that's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, when you come into that year, for all those Hypergate schools I've been doing for the last 4 years, and especially the parts where I cover Nostradamus in his Prophecies book, that date is not a date that's in the book, but it is a way of teaching his son, Caesar, in the preface of the book, how to understand how to use astrology in a hidden code because of the times in 1555 of religious order, monarchies, and so forth, that you couldn't just put the way to how to use the astrology to make prophecy work out there in a very easy way. So the way that you understand that, which maybe some people would like to see this because it'll make more sense, is here we go. So actually I found one of the more older translated books because it was written, of course, in Old French. But I found this one, and I like this one, and I've used this one a lot. But in the beginning, of course, is the preface, and it's a letter that's dedicated to his son, Caesar Nostradamus. Now, in this preface, he talks a lot about it, and I used ChatGPT to help summarize some of this for people, but I want to show this one part here. From the present time that I write this, which is March 1st, 1555, because he ends the preface with that date. Before 177 years, 3 months, 11 days, right, through pestilence, famine, war, and for the most part, inundations, the world between this and the prefix time before and after for several times shall be so diminished, and the people shall be so few. And it goes into much greater detail. But again, it's about the revolutions and understanding that the celestial bodies shall move again in the superior motion that maketh the earth firm and stable. And he's trying to help his son understand the moments in time when, from looking at where Nostradamus is at in 1555 to go 177 years into the future, that you use the astrology of that time period to understand what's going on. It's more complicated than that, of course. It goes into an epistle to Henry II, but I made this simple for people to see. So I said, right here, here we go. So I said, take that passage from March 1st, 1555, and it's June 12th, 1732. And so in a lot of the work that I did, what I showed people, because you said that date, and I was like, oh, well, you're on a very interesting target point. So we'll go to that date. I actually have it all saved here from my schools. Nostradamus, here we go. Future date, June 12th. And what's interesting is it's Saturn, of course, coming and making its ingress into Aries. It was in Pisces at the beginning of 1732. Same thing as in 1555. So that was one common denominator, is he's talking about the revolutions of Saturn crossing the Aries point as the defining moments, but counting how many different times that you get to that. So a lot of the code breaking is dealing with Saturn. But it's interesting because in that year, it was also Chiron in Aries at the same time. And if I'm right, I don't know how what we can do here is go to here and go to the very beginning of 1732 here. Yeah, it was Chiron in Aries, 28 degrees. Saturn at the end of Pisces, which we're into right now, and that's going to make its first ingress into Aries. And of course, it's also about relating to that preface chart that he's telling his son. But it's interesting to look at that future date because it really is exactly a year of history that you thought connected with what's happening right now. And before we go into that, I want to read to people some of the stuff that he had told his son here in the preface. So I used ChatGPT to make this easier for people. One, in the preface to his son, he addresses his son and explaining that he is leaving his prophetic work as a legacy for the benefit of humanity. He talks about the divine celestial origins. He emphasizes that the prophecies are divinely inspired, derived, and celestial astronomical alignments rather than human reasoning or using math without the spiritual celestial bodies. He sees predictions as a revelation from God or revelations from God and beyond ordinary understanding. And he also explains the challenging interpretations and to keep it obscure and symbolic because of the times and being, whether it's criticized or the misunderstandings by contemporary societies. And he cites the religious and political oppositions that might arise if the predictions were made too explicit. He warns about the future of times marked with wars, plagues, natural disasters, a decline in the population, and the devastation of lands that will remain uncultivated. Then he gets into the cosmic timelines, and that's where he starts getting into his millenaries or centuries. So all the chapters in the book are, of course, centuries. And the changes that are unearthed by that. He has some philosophical reflections about prophecy and divine inspiration. And so anyways, there's that. But I wanted to go into, in this work, he describes how he does this work and how you have to use astrology. It has to be connected with it. Understanding the astronomical revolutions and the divine inspiration, and stating that they stem from a higher power rather than the earthly or mystical forces or superstition. And then the method to the madness, I'll say, it is through the work of the deep study and aligning with celestial movements to unlock the hidden truths. So it's interesting that you came to one of the years that I keep on the radar as an astrologer that follows Nostradamus for prophecy work, like, ding, ding, ding. Mm-hmm. And this last one, he writes, for kingdoms, sects, and religions shall be so opposed that if I should relate what shall happen thereafter, those of the present reign, sect, religion, and faith would find it so disagreeing with their fancies that they would condemn that which future ages shall find and know to be true. So, what did you find in 1732?
Well, what I found in 1732 was, I'll go to, let's see. Oh, you're on mine, so let me go fast. Here, let's start with this. So this is an important, go back. This is a really important legal case that happened while we were a colonial place, right?
Right.
So we're still part of Britain, and we're being ruled by Britain in a typical way where the every colony has an appointed official that comes from Britain to rule that particular colony. And in 1731, one of the royal governors died. The governor in New York died, and a new one needed to be appointed. So meanwhile, I keep forgetting his first name. Rip. Of course it's Rip. Rip Van Dam, because I keep thinking of Rip Van Winkle.
Right.
So Rip Van Dam is appointed as the acting governor. And I'm using Wikipedia for those who want to know, because it's the easiest way to just quickly get to images and data for us to show, right? So Rip Van Dam had been a councilman. I don't know if people can hear a fire engine going by right here. So I'm surprised there's any left in Orange County at this point.
A lot of them have
So
gone
many
up
have
to
gone.
LA, and police.
Yeah. So he was born, he was the acting governor, but he had been a councilman first. And he just steps in and he acts as the governor, right? So he's familiar with this region. But this new man was appointed, and he'd been a royal governor elsewhere in the British world. And he is appointed to come to New York. So William Cosby comes to New York and is going to become their new governor. So I'm sure people thought, okay, great, we're taking care of things until he gets here. But what happens is that William Cosby arrives, and he then decides that Rip Van Dam doesn't need to be paid for being governor, and he demands the payment back from Rip. He demands that he take part of his salary and give it to William Crosby. Meanwhile, William Crosby had been doing illegal things with the funds, and so so that was being exposed, and it just opened up this whole can of worms that ended up being an extremely important case for the future of freedom of press in the United States.
That's so interesting to me because of the fact that this week, freedom of the press, whether it's from Mark Zuckerberg doing what he did with Meta and actually following the lead of Elon Musk, while Elon Musk is getting into these huge fights with the Prime Minister of the UK and asking to liberate the United Kingdom for freedom. And then even Mark Zuckerberg mentioning that, well, we know that other countries, and doesn't name the ones, but we know who he's talking about because there's been this backlash in not just Europe, but also in the United Kingdom about freedom of speech, and says we'll be the examples of freedom of speech. And so in many ways, it's brought us back to the old exact place we were with Pluto back in 1777 and 1778, the fight of this freedom for, especially the press, was one of the main places of freedom. I mean, we talk about the taxes but also representation, right? That really isn't being properly represented because, of course, they come from England, right? And the king is the one that sends you, you're going to be the governor of this colony now, which is actually what happens in Canada today. And it happens because you don't elect the governor general of Canada, and you don't elect the governor general of Australia. That's chosen by the king or the queen, whoever's in power. So it's interesting to me that this has been weird because it's almost the next round where is America really going to go to the root of the problem 248, 250 years ago? So it liberated its own self. Is it really now going to go liberate the people of the monarch? Even though the monarch's changed, it's still the same entity.
Well, yeah, it is. It is the same institution that's in place.
Or even with this whole Canada talk now, and then the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, steps down. The Governor General takes over, which it's funny, the media doesn't talk about the Governor General much, right? They don't like to show the picture or but what's interesting is that means the Crown has taken over, right? Parliament's out of session till late March. So the Crown is in control of Canada at the moment. And it always is. I mean, that's the other irony. But it's interesting that was also part of the Revolutionary War during these times, where the negotiation to end the war and give the freedom to the 13 colonies was this deal that was done, that Benjamin Franklin was part of and so forth, that was about, okay, you get your freedom, but we get Canada. And so Canada was part, and also a lot of British or loyalists ended up in Canada. And then they did leave a force of redcoats there to kind of be watch guards. And that's actually how the War of 1812 then started, as they came through Canada at the same time too. So it's interesting that the Canada thing, I think, is not maybe what people are thinking in the press right now, or when they're looking at these things, they're thinking, oh, it's just because the government of Trudeau, or it's the Prime Minister in the UK putting people into jails, or of course Elon Musk called them out for a lot more intense things of these grooming gangs that are there, and child sex crimes and exploitations that are going on there. It's to me about the original battle of republic and monarch.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting to me how much every little subtle issue is coming up.
Yeah.
Right. So I know that there are very important issues that are being debated, but the fact that it's the issue of, do we have the freedom to openly discuss what's happening, policies by the government that are leading to particular things, right? And people want to freely talk about those issues in the UK. But if we look at it from the perspective of this history, we have to even connect it back to the previous Pluto return in Capricorn, when in 1534, I always connect it back to the period of time that I study, but I guess I also study the 18th century.
Right.
So it always goes back to Henry VIII too for me, because our astrology really closely maps that period of time, right? So in 1534, Henry VIII had legally established this new, the Act of Settlement is released at that, or is passed at that point. And that puts the king at the head of the church and all of this. But in enforcing that legal break of the church, Henry VIII has to also suppress what people can say about him in print, because the printing press is still new at that time. And so people are still trying to figure out, how do we deal with this new technology, this new media, which is similar to social media now, where people are trying to figure out how much can we let them critique what the government is doing. So for Henry VIII, and also for King George III and George II, because that would have been him in 1532, it was this issue of, you didn't have freedom of press in England. You didn't have freedom of speech, I should say. Members of Parliament gained the right to have freedom of speech by the 18th century. But you couldn't print things that went against the authority of the government, even if they were true, in the 18th century, and especially under Henry VIII. You You couldn't print anything true about him because you would be taken in front of the Star Chamber and persecuted. And the other thing is that when they had a trial about seditious libel, right? So that's what it's called. When you print things that go against the government, they would have a trial, and in King Henry VIII's time, it went in front of the Star Chamber Court. There wasn't a jury, and it was just decided, yep, you printed that, and so you were guilty. It didn't matter if it was true or not. So then by the time we get to 1732 and 1733, by the time the trial is happening, the issue is it doesn't matter if William Crosby did bad things. If you print those bad things about him, that's seditious libel. And so there was a court case where it was decided that John Zenger, the printer who printed a newspaper, actually I should go back and show the newspaper.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could show that for us.
All right, so because people were so upset by this governor and what he did to Rip Van Dam, they started publishing the New York Weekly Journal. And that was a very common thing at this time. Newspapers, we've talked about this before, newspapers and periodicals new ones were being created all the time. And people who had money at this time, you could have a press. And you can. And
Benjamin Franklin was part of this during these times.
And people collected subscriptions, right? And said, I want to, like in this case, I want to print this New York Weekly Journal that's going to be all about the horrible things William Crosby did to Rip Van Dam. So that's what this whole thing was about. And a lot of it was written anonymously or pseudonymously with the name of Cato as the person who's writing these articles, all about what William Crosby had done financially and exposing the truth about him. But in the trial then, we can go back to...
So interesting, because if you think of the Wall Street Journal or you think of the New York Times, it's very similar, repeating now. We just saw this Blake Lively case that's happening right now, and that's all connected to the the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal getting 50 people, the Biden administration saying the president wasn't ever around. We don't, like it's interesting the way it's trying to shape stories, reality. And it's more propaganda than true most of the time.
Right, but at this time, it was supposed to be propaganda.
Yeah.
Right, you couldn't, after 1695, you could start to actually print things without a license, but you could never print anything about the government if it was going to cause people to doubt the authority of the government or to question the decisions of the government. So that's a difference. So the value in that case, in the British case, was and continues to lean in this direction. It's about don't say things that could disrupt the government, that could have a bad effect for the government. Maybe that's why we had to have a revolution against them, right?
Right.
But that was more the idea was we're protecting everybody's public order by not allowing people to say things that'll cause people to be upset. And so in this case, Zenger was found to be, or actually the jury, because this was a jury trial, the jury did not want to come back with the verdict saying he was
a hung jury?
Well, no, they came back and said he was not guilty. So this was guilty or innocent of having printed the newspaper. We know he printed the newspaper, but the jury refused to say that he printed this newspaper. That was the only verdict they were given. It was going to be, did he print it or not? And then the judge was going to say, okay, you did print it, so now I declare you're guilty of seditious libel. And here's your punishment, right? But the jury didn't want to come back with that verdict because that was a disempowering verdict, because Alexander Hamilton, who was not the Alexander Hamilton, another Alexander Hamilton who was the lawyer for Zenger, he had argued that these things were true, and why can't Zenger print things that are true? So that becomes this. My whole Google shut down, so I don't have the pages I had ready to go. It had to update, and then it shut everything down. But it becomes the foundation for the way that the United States institutionalizes freedom of speech.
That's
so it's
interesting.
A really important aspect of the things going on right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because there weren't a lot in the 13 colonies at that time period who had the money, and there weren't a lot of presses either.
Right.
It was like a monopoly like we see today with the social media, right? Like William Bradford, ironically enough, was one of the ones that started it in 1690 and was able to make the mill that supplied the papers to the colonial printers. Or William Parks, he was in 1742, so that would have been after this. So I was trying to find like who was around, and one of the main ones is Benjamin Franklin. But it's also interesting because as far as like the funding and control, right, it was largely in the hands of individual printers and their families. So whether they're wanting to, be on the right side of the governor, who's of course responding back and having correspondence with the king, right? To get good favor, to be able to have maybe even in Parliament in England at that time, like certain things, because all the stuff that's being chosen over the period of this period to the Revolutionary War, there's things that are being done in Parliament in England that are affecting the 13 colonies, and they're not getting much of a voice. And so it's interesting that it's like, we don't really probably know historically fully, not everything is recorded, on letters, I'm sure. I'm sure there was plenty of people who came on a boat to just tell a printer, hey, we want you to say this or say that, And I think that's what's interesting is that it comes up because we are in this year, the same Saturn transit, and Nostradamus is very clear, not just in the obscure way that he does it, but he's very clear as an astrologer and the clues that he leaves in his Prophecies book, that the end of Saturn in Pisces and the ingress to the Saturn Aries transit is an extremely defining moment, and especially all of the, it's funny, we hear terms like the deep state and clearing out the swamp. And in very many ways, that's what Nostradamus has used, is not just every, seventh Saturn Aries cycle, but every Saturn Aries cycle, the end of it is that Saturn Pisces transit for 2.5 to 3 years, where everything becomes so messy, and it becomes where we do have the famines, or like an example today, right now, the fires, right? Like things just kind of get out of order, and it becomes very sloppy. And it feels that feels like very sloppy to me. It's very much like people start kind of waking up when things get more chaotic, right? And so it was more interesting because 1732, what he's trying to tell his son is, if you refer it back to the 1555 Saturn ingress into Aries, that one is exactly more like the one we're in now, which is kind of interesting, the 1555 one. And he talks about when things really do start to kind of go towards the Republic. So I wanted to pull up this idea of the Republic very deeply, about why Nostradamus talked about it, but also we've covered that John Dee, what he was writing about. And so there was a fascination in the movement in the Renaissance period of whether they were Rosicrucians or alchemists or astrologers, about restoring the original Republic. They were not happy with the monarchs. And really, that's the beginning of what we call Illuminati. I mean, they went underground. They wrote in obscure ways. And even there's some obscurity. The author is putting them, and that's also what happened at the end of the Revolutionary War. And when we finally got to the Constitutional Convention with the Federalist Papers and all the pamphlets, that was obscure. Oh, we're going to use different names and put all these pamphlets out to make people, we want to be a federalist country with a federalist constitution. And then the anti-federalists putting out theirs. I mean, it's really interesting that it does come to this free speech thing in every form. And also back in 1555, it was a big deal because Nostradamus was afraid to publish the book the way he wanted to, because whether it was religious or whether it was the monarch, right? Or society coming on you because of, I would say in today's terms, like being brainwashed by the monarch or brainwashed by how people think in religions that, oh, if you're putting that out, that society itself could come at you. So there's a common thread of like people have been really afraid to express themselves, but there's been a movement in this transit over the last 2 years that I've never seen before. It was like something we took for granted, especially as Americans, like freedom of speech.
Right.
And it's really weird now that you're seeing the media in the last day say, well, now that Mark Zuckerberg's now become MAGA, like those are all the things. Now you can call a woman an object again. And things like that. Like, so it's like people, I'm like, what? So you're focused on what you want in the media to make somebody upset about. But freedom of speech is the expression of, it's infinite, meaning to get so locked in one area is kind of insane to me. But,
yeah, it's, anyway. Yeah. I don't know if there's something you wanted to show or.
Yeah, but I would love to get, as I put it up, what you think about that. Like,
I think I completely agree that it's when these cataclysmic events or when something dramatic happens and you recognize, wow, like, okay, let's take the fires as an example. Wow, our fire hydrants didn't have water. There's a huge institutional structural thing that broke down. This is horrible, right? It takes those sorts of moments where, let's hope, change happens, although when you think about how Maui just got swept under the rug, I don't know what's going to happen. But with those sorts of things, it's like in the time of the American Revolution, I was thinking about actually what I was thinking about was an answer that ChatGPT had given me, because I'm actually getting ready to be teaching new classes at the end of the month. And I really want to figure out how to incorporate ChatGPT because people do anyway.
Right.
They use AI, and I want to teach them how to use it critically. So I always like to see what it says first so that I can then investigate more and figure out why are you saying this? And one of the things it was doing was it was calling the idea of the government in the UK wanting to, I'm trying to be careful because I know people in the UK could be watching this, and I don't want anyone to get apprehended.
They could share this and then get arrested for sharing it. Yes. I mean, that's what's wild to me is that people in the UK are getting arrested for sharing. Not even post, like they're just like, oh, here, I'm sharing this on my page. Like,
yeah. And what's understood about it is, the assumption is, well, everybody knows that you just shared hate speech. And that's why we have to curtail you. And it's because of like what you said. Well, Mark Zuckerberg is speaking up and saying something opposite to what he said before or whatever, he's MAGA. Oh no, like he's gonna call for women to become slaves. I don't know what it's gonna be, right? That's the fear. And then they show the Handmaid's Tale women with their hoods on, and it's just, could we be more subtle than that? So in investigating this, what ChatGPT said was that the UK has a more balanced treatment of speech and that America has an absolutist treatment of speech.
Really?
Speech. And I said, why did you choose those words? I should have brought my conversation up. Like, why did you choose the words balanced versus absolutist? And it said, well, because, balanced is thinking of the community in addition to the individual. So then, of course, I went down the road of, well, who in the community decides what is okay to say? Because anytime you have a community, like the community notes, what's funny about that is the community will correct, then someone else corrects, and the next person corrects, and eventually you probably end up with something that's more like the truth. Because it is true, people will put false things out. So why, or they won't actually, maybe they're not trying to be false, they're just not informed. So someone else in the crowd, if you were in a real setting, right, and you stood up and said something, people are going to say, that's wrong. This is what I think, right? So you have a conversation in the public square. Yeah. So that has to be replicated in this situation. And the community notes do seem to be a good way to do that. But what ChatGPT was saying was, well, but in that case, it can become hate speech. But that's like, how do we leap from that?
Well, that was programmed. It was programmed. Yeah,
right?
That's where the AI's trained off. It ironically timed over the last 5 years, where hate speech becomes a big social media buzzword, and one of the reasons why to take away people's civil liberties. I think what's happened too is it reminds me of Martin Luther, because what he did with his thesis is get people to question the Pope. And what it does is it allows people not to take it as, I'm a leader, I'm a follower of Martin Luther, even though people did that. There's still Lutheran, there's still churches based off him. But it's interesting that it allows not the government, not the religious institution to dictate what's true and not. A community notes thing is where you, the individual, get to determine what's true or not on your own by doing your own research. And that's the way the founders of America wanted it, that the government shouldn't be saying at all, at any time, that you shouldn't say anything.
Right.
Right?
Because it's always going to end up saying, you can't say that about us, and we are the ones who know everything, right? So...
And then, that gets very 1984 to, Brave New World stuff, to all these kind of things, but it even goes into kind of like the way that Hitler kind of forced the Nazi culture to adhere to more than speech, but how you have to live your lifestyle, or even communist countries and how they do that. Even though it was so funny he was against communism, yet there were so many parallels. But I feel that in the times that were of the Revolutionary War with Pluto and Aquarius, or going back to Henry VIII in the Ingress last time that we had it prior to the Revolutionary War, that is the one common denominator that's now a common denominator now. That all three transits of Pluto Ingress into Aquarius have been about free speech. Because even Henry was, in his own way, saying, I want the freedom to do what I want to do, and used the church part of it to be able for a marriage, of course. But it allowed him also to be like, I want to have the freedom to express the religion the way that I want to, right? So there was that. Of course, it's the very beginning of it. And it also makes people think for the first time, like, what would it be like? Am I going to still go to heaven or not if I'm part of the Church of England and I leave the Pope and the Catholic Church that I've been so used to, that's in Latin, and I'm going to have an English Bible? And those are crazy thoughts to have. But they're thoughts that open you up to think differently and to observe your life more. And so freedom of speech to me is that core of why it is the First Amendment that eventually ends up in the Constitution. And it is one of the, parts of the Declaration of Independence, right? This idea that we can speak for ourselves and we are declaring our independence without your authority, right? So freedom of speech also means like I'm communicating what I'm going to do, and I don't need your authority to say it, to feel it, to express it. Right? So now we come to now, and it's been interesting that I can't even believe in America that people are having an argument over, I can't believe that the social media companies now want people to speak freely. Like, that's the way it was on MySpace.
Well, that's
nobody was curtailing MySpace.
No, I mean, that's how it was when they were printing books for the first time.
Right.
I mean, you have to remember too, Henry VIII was the defender of the faith at first. Remember, he was against Luther, and he was against free speech. He was against misinformation, I should say. And then suddenly he became the biggest proponent of his information. Right. But then he established a court so that people couldn't talk about what he was doing. Right. So.
Well, to add to that, he said that about Martin Luther because he's trying to also stay on the right side of the politics with the Pope and the Catholic Church and the cardinals and the bishops. And because in the old books that I have, it shows that for, it wasn't just Henry VIII, but it was his father, Henry VII. It goes back farther, all the way to Edward IV, Edward III, King Richard. Like, all of them wanted that for those 100 years, like that 100+ years during the 100-year War of the Roses. During those periods, people were questioning it. There was Englishmen at the funeral of Joan of Arc questioning it. So it's like he's saying it because he kind of has to keep people happy. But then when it finally comes to his move, oh no, thanks. He was on. It's kind of like, it reminds me of Mark Zuckerberg right now. Like, it's a very Mark Zuckerberg move. Like, oh yeah, we got to make sure there's, fact checkers and all that stuff. But in his talk yesterday, he alluded that the governments and the politics had taken over, meaning the Biden administration, and that they're done as a company allowing that to happen.
Right.
And whether you look at the Twitter files that Elon Musk, right, and very left-leaning journalists who brought out that truth, right? So it doesn't, to me, it's not political as far as like, oh, the right's better and the left is bad. It's just a fact as individuals in the country right now, it just happened to be under the regime of the Biden administration, and whoever's really behind it, this idea to take away people's freedoms of liberties in many directions. We can go into health and all that stuff, but especially the common denominator is speech. And if anything, if you think about it, speech is everything in your life. It's how you communicate. It's where you're forming your opinions. It's where you're forming your ideas, your dreams. It's how you're able to communicate to other people. It's how you can share ideas. A place where you can't do that, it limits the ability to express your God-given natural right as a soul to be here on this earth in many ways. So it's really weird to me because we finally have, I think, this week, the denominator that really Pluto and Aquarius in history, you can look back and it be about speech and the freedom of it. And even the buildups to it, which I think is interesting because the same time period of 2025 and the ingress, that newspaper article you showed in 1732 was January of 1732. And here we are in January of 2025 with Saturn in Pisces near the end, about to ingress into Aries, and the beginnings. So we're having so many simultaneous transits happening that are all connected to those Pluto ingress points that are very much playing the same tune. And the side that wins is that freedom of speech side. I think that to get to the Republic thing I wanted to show, because I think the overarching theme is more than that. I think it's about, because with Henry VIII, it was about leaving a religious institution that had its grip over a country and the monarch itself, right? So there's already kind of a breakaway there in 1531 and 32, right? With Henry into 33 and 34, those whole 4 years of that Pluto ingress, right? That whole schism. And that's like the beginning of what, and you know, we've said it before, but other monarchs being like, did this guy really just leave? You could do that? Because I don't think a monarch prior to that had the guts or even thought that it was possible.
Including himself, right? That's why when you were talking about how he suddenly kind of comes up with this idea to go against the church, it's not like he was lying before that. He wasn't being a fake person. Mm-hmm. When you are someone who's in line to be king, and I know he wasn't supposed to be the king,
no,
but you're still part of this royal family, and your legacy partly comes from this, knowing that the Pope is the head of the religious aspect of
right.
what you represent on earth, right? No one had thought, well, actually, there'd been people before who'd contested the Pope and had, you know, been excommunicated and horrible things had happened. But as the leader of your country, part of what you have to do is to represent the people. So if you go against the Pope and he excommunicates you, all of your people are excommunicated.
Yeah.
And they're unsaved. So for himself to finally come to that conclusion that he needed to break from Rome, it was a huge shift in his mind. I mean, maybe it was because he fell from the horse and hit his head right before that time. Or was that, oh no, that was after he actually married Anne Boleyn, I think. He'd fallen from the horse. So,
yeah.
You know, but it was really a balance.
She was the first real love that he wasn't forced to have to love, because he married his dead brother's widow.
Right.
That he was
and
forced
he was doing
to,
the right
right?
thing,
so
right?
If you're a man who's a monarch, you're the first time that you get to choose your lover, you're gonna joust. You're gonna pull all the stops to impress the French woman, right?
Right.
But it's interesting because I want to bring this up, that Henry VIII, because of his brother Arthur passing away, that made his father Henry VII so there was so much tragedy in Henry VII's monarch, right? Like Arthur passing away, when his wife passed away, Elizabeth, right? And the connection to Edward IV and the daughter, right? And how that's, right? It's really interesting that it was these last resort feelings of Henry VIII to continue a Tudor line, because he knows that his prior monarchs were in wars of who's the right monarch.
Right.
So for the fact of Arthur dying, Henry VII is now tripping out that he might lose the crown, right? That, is it going to be okay? Like that was the fear. So there's like a trauma fear, very Pluto, right? Like of like, when it gets to Aquarius, of like, who's just going to feel like this is the last shot we've got? I'm going to do whatever I got to do. Then you go to the American Revolutionary War with the Founding Fathers. We're the only people that could pull this off right now. This is our only moment. We have the people. We have 13 colonies willing to sign a declaration together. We're doing this. And then same thing now. You have people saying, this is our last moment to save freedom of speech, to save the world from tyrannical ways. We're pulling all the stops that we've got. So that's another thing that I would say is a common denominator, is this idea that the buck stops here literally, because after this, there is no more going back. So there is this kind of, and it's weird because it feels like it's a revolution again, even though it's a revolution about a revolution that was already had. That's what makes this so interesting, is that,
yeah.
But if it's in the same space that it was a revolution, it's now looking at the culprit from the beginning of it, which is the United Kingdom at this time.
I think it's really this last day, I think why we're so excited about this right now is that with what Elon Musk did and Mark Zuckerberg, we finally, now it's like we see, oh, this is how it's playing out this time. Because we were back there. I feel like, yes, because we were back in time in all those other times, and maybe we were. But it's like we finally see, oh, that's how the UK is playing a role. Maybe this is about the UK's Pluto return. That's what I keep thinking. Because we left last time, right?
Right.
And they didn't have to deal with the issue because we fought a revolution, we created the United States, we set it up in a way that seems very British, and the reason the revolution even touches off is because people in the Americas had this identity of themselves as English people with certain rights. And when they felt those rights were crossed, they had a problem with the government, right? They started printing about it. They started to pour tea into the harbor, protesting all sorts of things, and then they eventually created militias and went to war. So that's what happened then. Then we break away. What does Britain do? They said, oh, it's not this simple, but they started a new empire. They found new colonies where their corporation that was also involved here, the East India Company, sets up an operation in another country in India, right? And becomes very powerful, has its own legal system and justice system and all of that. And then England comes in and takes over that. So they kind of set up a different type of colony that wasn't actually English people with English rights. It was people they could control because they didn't respect them or value them. I think of it like there's so much involved where it wasn't a complete transformation for the English system, if you want to look at it that way.
That makes sense. And it also is more after the Dutch beating them out for many hundreds of years in trading, right? The Flying Dutchman. It's the British moment of taking the reins and being the monarch of the seas and trade around the world. Because the Dutch were still involved, but not nearly as big as they were in the centuries prior. So it was also the English kind of taking, well, we lost that, but we could get this, and we have powers here now. But it's interesting because the idea of like monarch and republic or emperor, right? Republic, because it's kind of those two. I mean, that's different than communism or dictatorship or, right? Because there's this bloodline or there's these families, right? Like emperors kind of define themselves, right? Or dictatorships can be a whole different thing. But if you look at some of the writings, so the Republic, and this is all from the book, and this is his in the epistle to Henry II that's in between the 7th and 8th century. He writes extensively about the downfall and resurgence of various forms of government, including monarchies and republics. He envisions a world in flux where kingdoms are overthrown and new forms of governance arise. One significant prophecy in the epistle speaks of many kingdoms, 1 to 5, shall be changed, indicating shifts in governance that could include the rise of republics in regions previously ruled by monarchs. He also mentioned the change of laws, which could signal republican ideals in the traditional rule, and then the fall and renewal of a republic. So he talks during the periods of famine, war, and this is going to where he said to his son in the preface, which connects to the astrology of 1732, connects to now in 1555, connects to so much of what we're in astrologically right now, that he suggests that the existing power structures, including republics, may collapse due to societal strain. However, he also hints at an eventual renewal tied to the cosmic cycles. We are now in the 7th millenary, which ends all and brings us near the 8th, where the celestial body shall move again. Now, people are thinking that kind of like, what is that, 700 into 800 or 1700 and 1800? No, it's the revolutions of Saturn around the zodiac, which is 29 and a half years. So at the seventh one, when you get moved to the eighth, that's where, there's something that's everything's moving again, and that's what he proves in the astrology. So 1732, you see things moving again. In the 1555 chart, it's Mars retrograde in opposition to Venus retrograde. It's a really hard chart, which we're actually kind of in right now. But it's interesting that like it's all about this renewal of republics and bringing down them, or the persecution of the church in the republic. He often links the fate of republics with that of the church, right? So if you look at the church, I saw a lot of people online during Christmas talking about the Pope and opening the doors of the prison doors, right? He was opening up so many different portals during the Christmas holiday that people were really questioning, like, what's this? Like, what is he doing? Some of it, I don't know if it's true or not. There was speculation that he was working with CERN to open up portals during Christmas.
That's what I heard something about this, but I don't know.
I looked into it, and it was more, it wasn't like the Pope was sitting there in his wheelchair in front of CERN. But he did open the doors of the prison, which are basically I don't want to get it wrong, but it's an area of the Vatican where those doors lead into records people, or at the idea of sin, basically, right? But it's interesting because all this has really come full circle so fast in this last couple days here, and as we start 2025, and I wanted to bring up this one part that I told you was really, I was going to save the best for you.
Okay.
The ultimate fate of republics. Nostradamus writes cryptically about the long-term survival of republics. In the epistle to Henry II, he envisions a future time when governance systems will align with universal peace and cosmic harmony, but only after great upheaval. He connects this to the 8th millenary, a time of renewal and enlightenment. He hints at republics playing a role in this transformation, as they represent a more egalitarian form of governance compared to monarchies. However, he warns that they must overcome corruption, internal strife, and moral failings to survive, which I feel like that's what's been going on right now. And in the conclusion, he writes about the corruptions and the potential vehicles for progress and harmony and so forth. He also does talk about Saturn. So in his idea that Saturn shall come again, so all that being calculated, the world draws near to an anorganic revolution, death-dealing revolution. And so if you study Nostradamus enough, you realize it's the Saturn ingress Aries point. And this is the biggest one we've ever had that's coming up here in 2026 since the beginning of Babylon. We have not seen Saturn, Neptune conjunct at 0 Aries. And this year we see the beginnings of that with both of them ingressing into Aries, but not conjuncting. And that's happening here this spring. So it's happening already really fast. And I feel that it's about monarch and republic. So the big question I have for you, Anne, as an astrologer to a historian, and with honoring freedom of speech to speak wherever you might feel, Justin Trudeau just stepped down. There's no confidence in the parliament for him at all, right? So the Socialist Party left the Liberal Party, Conservative, right? So in Parliament, they're like, we don't trust you anymore. The head of finance resigned, right? So that was one of the big reasons too. And then he goes down and meets with an incoming American president who was a prior president right? So this is super new. And after that, Trump saying, I told him you could be the governor of, which is so funny, right? It's kind of like the monarch, but the governor of the 51st state. And after that, it's literally Trudeau's end. Then you mix with Trump going to Notre Dame, not President Biden. The French president invites him, and he goes and meets with Prince William. I mean, all these really interesting things. Where is the royal family now? Because I know I'm taking a lot into this question, but it's a big one. Because I feel that there's going to be questions using these new technologies like AI. We already know that, you know, the DNA of 23andMe and Ancestry, right? Like they have the ability now to find your genealogy, because there's a lot of questions about the line itself. Like, it's not like, oh, you're part of this one bloodline and you're the exact, you know, there was a 100-year war over who's the monarch, whether it's the Stuarts or whether it's going into Scottish ranks or if it's going, right? It's like there's all these battles and all these things. My question is, what do you think as a historian, since we haven't seen the fall of the English crown since William the Conqueror from the Norman Knights?
Or since Charles I, right?
Or Charles I. Yeah, that's why I wanted to get your, yeah. Right?
Okay, I'm sorry, but you didn't finish your question.
Do you think that in the state of the affairs today, and looking back maybe at the English Civil War, that it's more probable for the crown to fall or less probable? I'm kind of pulling a gladiator moment with
am I
you.
supposed to just do that?
I don't know.
I think it's less probable that they'll fall, but I don't know why. It's my intuitive guess on it.
Well, why don't you take us into, because you're actually one of the best professors in the world of the English Civil War. So, like, how was it, like in layman's terms, and kind of try to connect with now, how could it look now that would look like the people were able to crush, behead, and I don't want that, of course, right? I don't want beheadings, right? But like to fully get rid of the monarchy being in rulership and making all decisions and trying to be in its own way and be an independently run country without a monarch. Like, what were the signals that were happening that got Charles I beheaded and got the people to rule? And what would that have to look like now? Or are we hitting some of those marks now, I guess is the question. Okay.
The reason I don't think it's to the level of the Civil War is that Parliament, you know, it was a number of years where the king was overstepping his authority, right? And the king, Charles I, had made a shift, right? He had changed government in a way that he was not calling Parliament. And I do think, I mean, I don't know, I guess if we looked at it in this long-term view, in 2011, or I don't remember when it was, that they were passing, they limited the term of Parliament, of members of Parliament in Britain, and then they took that away and reinstated it back to its older, however long you could serve in Parliament before elections were called, or I don't, you know, I'm really mangling this, but there was a recent discussion of the basic structure of how long you could serve in Parliament. So I suppose those issues have come up, and it was around, the time of the end of Queen Elizabeth II's reign. But the thing with Oliver Cromwell is that I feel that I don't know what the astrology is of that time, but we're not there yet. What would have to happen is that someone declares the government corrupt, and, maybe it's the EU wanting to come in, and, there's people who want to join the EU, and so it overthrows the government in that way, and the monarchy gets replaced. I don't know, but I feel like in England, what would have to happen is that it would just be something that people agree to do, and there's an act in Parliament that passes, and the monarchy becomes symbolic and not sponsored at all by the state. I don't know. I just don't know why I don't see it actually happening now.
Well, because what would be interesting is like, okay, let's say, how can, if President Trump is alluding to making Canada a 51st state in a purchase, I guess that would have to be through the crown, right? Because at the end of the day, I know that it's the illusion of the parliamentary monarch, right? Like that makes choices, when really at the end of the day, it's going to be who's on the paper money of Canada. Oh, soon to be Charles III, because they've been taking a minute to make the changeover, but it's Queen Elizabeth II the Canadians use. Right? 2, you have people in the UK not happy about the way that the new prime minister has taken over. The royal family has had a lot of problems over the last 4 years, right? Whether it's the Meghan Markle situation and the baby, and the idea that it was Charles, and that was the one that was saying, is the baby going to look too black, right? To Prince Andrew and Epstein, to, I mean, the list is kind of long here. And also what happened with Princess Kate, the Duchess, right? Like, and how she's gone MIA, and there's been questions with using AI. Like, all that needs to be found is that there's something exposed that is not really happening in people's face, but has been happening behind the scenes, that could tilt the whole scales of people very, very fast. I mean, right now you have people afraid to post about anything, really, unless I guess it's like about tea time in the United Kingdom. You have Scotland, who has been very vocal over the last 4 years of asserting their uniqueness, per se. It's almost kind of rebringing up Scottish revolutions, because that's the other thing of the last Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn that was prior to the one in 15, 17, and 18 with Martin Luther, was the Scottish Revolution. So you also have, does Scotland jockey with, right? You have Brexit that's happened in 2019 into 2020, so already they're disconnected from the EU. It is one of those things to where it's just waiting for that, in my opinion, that last little thing to kind of, when you have a population already feeling overwhelmed by inflation, forced to do this Ukraine war, they're getting pamphlets about be prepared for flashlights if a bomb goes off, to if you're posting anything that's too masculine or anything that is about the immigration system that has been extreme in the United Kingdom, right? Right, where you have less than half the population that are English white in England now, right? In all the major cities. And you have now a prime minister who's denying what people are seeing in their face as true of these grooming situations and these crazy situations we saw that brought up in the last 6 months, the very big strike down on freedom of speech in there was never freedom of speech in the United Kingdom, but it felt like it was, but it really did get stricken down after there was all the riots by people in the Muslim community and the local citizens, right? And that's really how to quell it. That it does feel very much like just one wrong move by the monarch, and it's a tinderbox, it feels like.
I think the monarch would have to really upset the current government. And to me, it seems that they've worked really hard to support some of the same agendas. I mean, Charles, anyway, as what the prime minister now supports as well, that I don't see enough of a difference between them, I guess I should say, is what I mean. But I wanted to point out also that when I searched for what are the royals doing today, it said Prince Harry and Meghan Markle could be ordered to evacuate their home in Montecito, California. So these fires are applying to all sorts of the stories we're talking about today.
Or I found a good one.
Oh, no.
6 hours ago. King Charles is taking it global in 2025, but no plans with Trump this year. That'll have to wait until 2026. So the king and the queen are going to finish out their holiday break in Scotland and getting ready for a jet-setting new year. Right? So, but the king, who will return to London for weekly cancer treatment, is said to be greatly looking forward to resuming a busy diary once he has enjoyed the New Year break at Burkhall. His doctors are said to be delighted at the progress he has made and what he's capable of doing, right? And I guess the Queen, Camilla, who suffered from a serious case of pneumonia before Christmas, is said to be much better. And supposedly now the Princess Kate, the Duchess Princess Kate, right? Like, isn't that when you're the next in line, right? Is it the right? So she's doing better too after using AI. It's been admitted, right? It feels very much like, oh, you're going to go try and be the nice guy around the world right now? Means you're trying to quell something.
It's really interesting that what's happening to me is when, YouTube knows that I'm a British historian and that I will watch videos that have to do with British history. And for some reason, recently, I've been getting suggested a lot of videos about Princess Diana, right, who was the people's princess, who was mistreated by Charles in this narrative. And there's a lot of stuff coming out of, here's Diana's interviews that she did when she talked about how mistreated she was by Charles. And that's coming up on my feed. The other story that's coming up, or the old videos that are coming up all of a sudden, are of Sarah Ferguson, who was married to Andrew, and kind of showing her less than flattering side. I get like how things that she's done that were mistakes, and the kinds of, it's more negative videos about her. But at the same time, you'll see videos about Kate and William was shown at Notre Dame talking to Trump and looking very strong for him. Because remember when we first saw him after Charles was sick and people didn't know what was going on, William was very shaky in public. And that was the same time when everything was going on with Catherine. But I think that by these videos of Diana coming out and The Crown, on that TV show, The Crown, it just went over Princess Diana's life. And there's a lot of favorable sentiment towards her. So I feel like that's going to connect to William and then his kids too. And I think there will be people who want to keep them around for that. But there's also all these anti-Camilla videos that come out too. So I feel like it will, if anything, Charles will just resign even, maybe, I don't know. And then William would take over and it would probably be maintained at a different level. I just don't see it going anywhere because like you were saying too, if the whole system changes and they become a constitutional republic or some sort of more democratic, not a constitutional monarchy, but if they change the fundamental nature of their government, and meanwhile Canada joins the United States, which I don't think it is unless like we do have Napoleon on our hands, and that's a different show. If Trump's extending the American virtues around the world for the good of the world, maybe that's the next thing. But I just feel like if they change the structure of the British government, then they'd have to get rid of the monarchy.
Right.
But I don't see how that can happen quickly. But I did think of another connection with Pluto, and I think it's Pluto and Aquarius, is the Louisiana Purchase. Because when you were talking about Canada, the only way that could happen is we negotiate a purchase.
Right.
Right? And when you think about the amount of land we acquired in that deal,
it's a massive amount.
But I still don't believe that's possible. But I'm not an
Well, and
astrologer.
that was also with the French, that purchase.
Yeah. But
Right.
I mean, they were
And they
also
were
involved in the revolutionary story.
right. Well, or how about this? Because this is where it connects the crown. And this is that the Governor General betrayed the Constitution by letting the Liberals escape Parliament and close Parliament for Justin Trudeau resigning, who he requested to the Governor General. And it's funny because a lot of people in America don't realize the Governor General represents the crown in the country that it's the Governor General of. So in Canada, the Governor General in all ways represents the king and makes choices. But it's like in the United Kingdom, the Prime Minister meets every week with the monarch and goes over what's happening in Parliament or just what's happening in the country. But nobody knows what's said in those meetings. And so to me, it's kind of weird because it's a lot like, oh, so the Prime Minister goes and meets every week with the king or the queen, whoever it is, and there's no influence there supposedly, but there's tons of influence, and the influence even to get for Parliament, for him to shut down Parliament, he had to get that from the Governor General, which is the monarch. And it goes against the way the Constitution is, because if you step down, there should be a snap election and find out who's going to be that, instead of calm it down and wait for the time to find somebody in the Liberal Party who could represent it for 2.5 months. So to me, this is going to get bigger, in my opinion, because this is kind of unprecedented. What Justin Trudeau did, and that the Liberal Party is not the government because they're the minority party. So she shut down the whole entire Parliament for 2.5 months for the minority party. But that connects back to the king.
Yeah, and that aspect of things, that's a little bit more similar to the English Civil War, I would guess.
Oh.
Is that what you wanted me to get to?
Well, and because I think of the American Civil War, and, of course, that's the problems within a republic, right? The English Civil War is the problems within the fight between the monarch and the common people, right? So, and then Parliament too. So there's like it's like a three-tiered problem, and trying to work it out, which I would say is more complicated, right? And it kind of goes to extreme measures in order to do it, right? Like, I guess in order to get rid of the monarch, we cut off the monarch's head in public, and that says it's done, right? So it's possible. But my question too is, as well as if you go to the news, right, about the monarchs, like Meghan Markle 2 hours ago extends an olive branch to King Charles III, right? With this poignant message. I guess she did a heartfelt video honoring her late rescue dog, Guy, and a very subtle message to Charles III. So you have her and her husband, who he's a prince, are on professional separation in public. We have his issues with his own brother, Prince Andrew, of using the money for all this lavish living, right? While doing sex crimes and so forth, right? So it's pretty crazy. You have him and what happened with Princess Diana. I think everybody points the finger at the monarch. And he's going to go on a tour in the most volatile time in the world and hasn't spoke up or said anything about the election in America. He's avoiding Trump. So that's kind of weird. He's going everywhere but going to avoid America. And that's of today. And it's interesting to me because I feel that maybe other world leaders, or there's some people who know something about the monarch that we all don't know. Right? And that's where I feel that, you know, Elon Musk made his post, right? So for the context for people, Elon Musk made criticism in this last 2 weeks, and it got really extreme in the last couple days to where the prime minister actually made his address public against Elon Musk, right? But issues related to child sexual exploitation in the UK. He also called for Starmer's resignation and even suggested that the prime minister should be imprisoned over alleged cover-ups of grooming gangs. And also Musk labeled Jess Phillips, the UK's parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls, as a rape genocide apologist, asserting that she deserves to be imprisoned for handling of these issues. And the calls for political change, Musk has advocated for broader political upheaval in the UK. He has called for new elections, expressing support for Nigel Farage, who is the one who created Brexit and passed and made it go through, right? So Nigel Farage is the Reform Party, right? He's the one who made Brexit happen. So, right, and suggested that the United States should liberate Britain from its current government, describing it as tyrannical. That's exactly what happened.
I know.
In this transit.
I know. Well, it's also interesting then when Mark Zuckerberg did his thing.
Right.
He said, you sort of alluded to this before, right? That he said the U.S. has the strongest constitutional protections for free expression in the world. Europe has an ever-increasing number of laws, institutionalizing censorship and making it difficult to build anything innovative there. Latin American countries have secret courts that can order companies to quietly take things down. China has censored our apps from even working in the country. The only way that we can push back on this global trend is with the support of the U.S. government, and that's why it's been so difficult over the past years. Even when the U.S. government has pushed for censorship. But he says, basically, where's that other statement, where it's really that what the U.S. has, that is what's the U.S. contribution to the world, is this idea of free speech.
And the technologies that bring it to people, because sure, the iPhone, the MacBook, the PC parts that people build PCs with are all made in China, but the technology, the minds behind them, and the patents and everything are American-made companies and corporations. Yeah,
and that's the other issue, though, is that I think how Elon Musk gets critiqued the most is right now what we see a lot is he's trying to buy the prime minister, or he's trying to buy the government in the UK, right? And that he's really the puppet behind Trump, and that it's this big that he has corporate interests and he wants to take over the world. He's got too much power. And so I was thinking, okay, was that discourse around during the time of the American Revolution? And it definitely was that, you know, that's the underlying part. Another aspect to the American Revolution was that you had people who wanted there to be more free trade. So you had these Whig politicians that had commercial interests And there's a whole lot more behind that, but I don't really
Right.
want to go into it right now. But I'm just saying that there were also at that time wealthy individuals who wanted more freedom to do their
Magna
to
Carta.
follow their industry. Well,
Yeah.
but and the idea of Magna Carta is also, you know what's interesting about the Magna Carta? There's freedom for the lords to
Right.
push back and the barons, but it also said not if it's for the bad of the government. So it's not until the United States where we said that's what's unique about the United States is that by institutionalizing freedom of speech by the people, right, and by having well, I mean,
Well, and
I don't
people
wanna talk
elect
about just the press.
right, but people also electing their own people to run.
You're right. We're
country
electing our
and have no-
representatives,
yeah,
but to have that is unique to that particular moment in history.
And determine how it trades, how it does its own monetary policy.
Mm-hmm.
That the people are determining everything on its own, whereas
Except
the
that
right,
we don't now. I mean, I think that's
Right.
part of the issue now is
the Federal
what's happened
Reserve,
is
yeah,
that that was something else that we should
Because-
talk about in another show too, because that all changed without consent. A lot of things with our currency changed. But I guess.
but yeah,
with
because
consent,
now there's an institution that's separate than the government that's private, and you don't know what banks are there, so they're world banks, meaning it could be that the United Kingdom and the the Bank of England, right, could be part of that private money just as much as the Vatican can be part of that money that turns into this, machine that looks like it's American printed Federal Reserve notes, but the money that's backing it is private. Nobody's allowed to know who the private bankers are that have the representative in the front.
that has been an issue that comes up. That came up for an organization that I volunteered for. I'm just going to say it like that,
Right.
where there was private money that it had been commonly kept behind the scenes and nobody knew how it was being spent except for the head of that organization. And there was a huge issue over decisions that were made with that account, right? And so it transformed over like the past 8 years where it's become more transparent and it's now supposed to be more publicly known what happens with this money. But what I noticed was changes were promised, but there's still not accountability. And I feel like that is an issue happening right now too, is that we've gotten to the point where there are so many, it's not just corporations. That's where I was going to say how you would look at Elon Musk that way. But those corporations also never argue for their own regulation. And in a way, Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, by saying they want to protect free speech, can go against themselves, right? Like if you look
Right.
at Twitter, or X, I have never liked Twitter because I've found it to always be a meaner space on social media.
Right.
And I'll go on there, and then after a while, I'm just like, no, I can't take it. I hear Blue Sky is just as bad now too, but from some people, I don't know if that's true because I haven't gone on it. But
I'd say it's
in the
more
end,
radicalized on there.
like you're saying, go ahead and critique me. People say horrible things about Elon Musk every time I look at it.
Right.
So I don't know. Anyway, I don't know what my point is.
Well, and
but
I think a good way to use like history would be a lot of people were unhappy with Benjamin Franklin being part of the 13 colonies to break away, including his own son, right? So there was a lot of shit talking on Benjamin Franklin, right? If you think about it, it's kind of the similar thing, right? It's kind of like, yeah, there's people talking crap on Elon Musk, right? Because those are a lot of people that he used to work with, or a lot of people who bought Teslas were liberals, and like their whole fantasy of their life in Tesla world now is kind of a question of like, if I drive one, am I supporting MAGA and freedom, or am I supporting the old liberal Biden voting Musk, right? So, but there's also this is the period of we've discussed it, but turncoats, right? So there's positive turncoats and there's negative ones. And so it's kind of interesting that a positive turncoat turning to the rebel side, right? Which it is the rebel side right now. I don't even want to go on the left or right. Just right? There's this establishment and then there's the anti-establishment, which is federalist or anti-federalist, right? So there's this kind of like weird anti-federalist / expanding the federalist part of the country by making a state is a very federalist thing, like Canada. So it's weird to see this anti-federalist stance about like the Bill of Rights and the amendments and the freedoms that are in there, but maintaining the core of the Constitution and the federalist nature and expanding that to others, right? So that's what's kind of a new ballgame, I would say. But if you look at Elon Musk in history, he is kind of I guess Benjamin Franklin went on that team, or even George Washington, right? Because he was a British captain, and then ended up becoming a general at the very beginning, before the Declaration of Independence, and commander of the Continental Army, right? So you would have tons of loyalists that would have been, and they were printing bad things about them, right? But then you have, if you think of the money, right? Like in our debt system today, they talk so much about we need to get out of debt. Well, they don't print enough money. So they apply a bunch of debt, they put out money, but the money supply, there's never enough money to actually pay off the debt. So it's a rigged house, like it's a rigged casino. Right, so they say that there's all these jackpots, or we need to get to where everybody can get all this money. Well, there's not enough money to get rid of the debt. They don't put out enough money to ever pay off the debt. So it's impossible, right? So that's one. And then we're already in so much debt. So it's almost kind of like a weird way of like, how do we get out of this situation? Well, you get the people of all these other countries to join force with you, and at the same time overthrow their old style monarchs. Because like Canada is stuck in a monarchy. The Governor General made the choice, and they use it in such a term that makes it not feel like it's the monarch, but it is the monarch.
Right, but it's what's interesting for Canada's case, because I remember we talked about this once. And so I was going down this whole rabbit hole of how does he get appointed? And it is the prime minister who chooses the governor general. And
but
then it's appointed or approved by the monarch.
Right.
So in that case, you have someone that Justin Trudeau knew, okay, well, if I step down, at least he's got my back. She, whatever, has my back. That's how much I researched it. I don't even know her name.
Right.
But I just don't feel like, I don't know what's going to happen in that situation. But what's interesting to me is there's so much name calling in the process of people just now realizing, okay, for whatever reason, whether it's financial, like you don't want your company to lose money when Trump comes to power, if you think he is going to turn into a dictator and you need to like get on the right side before he becomes in power, or if you're standing up for freedom of speech, because I've seen all these different arguments out there that it's happening right now because things are in flux, and it is that period of time. And if we zoom out and look at everything that's happening right now, it's like you were saying, it's massive things happening where you can turn on, like I turned on the news last night, and I know it's local, it doesn't apply to everybody, but one of the reporters is saying it's like the apocalypse out here. And that's a reporter who would normally never refer to something that sounds religious in any way.
Right.
But that was the term they used to describe watching houses in Pasadena burn. So if you zoom out,
or they used Inferno, I saw too.
Yeah. Yeah, all these things, are they all related to the astrology? Because it seems like Mars retrograde in Cancer would have something to do with houses burning down. I don't know. I mean,
With the full moon coming this weekend, which happens, what's the United States? It's a Cancer country, so it's got Mars retrograde and a full moon that's going to occult and hide Mars, which is very rare. Right? Last time we saw something kind of similar was a lunar eclipse in 2018 in Aquarius conjunct Mars retrograde. And that's kind of an interesting time period, the summer of 2018, with the Brexit and building that up. And also in America with Trump and the new, who's the new Congress and the Democrats and the beginnings of, we're going to impeach Trump, right? Like, the Mueller report doesn't come out the way we want to, so we're going to impeach him over Ukraine, right? They jump from Russia to Ukraine, but it's interesting because, if you think about what happened in the Revolutionary War that really pissed off King George, when the product that America was delivering, or the colonies were delivering, was the tea, it was the tobacco, right? So dumping the tea was part of it, but also living in the colonies at that time, they had to forego, if I remember correctly, a lot of the things that they used, that they made in the colonies, to kind of restrict that from going over to England as a way of see, we have some power over here, right? So if you think of where we're at now, this freedom of speech thing is integrated. You have Elon Musk with Starlink, who, with Ukraine, no problem. I got you guys internet. What has Russia been doing over the last 3 weeks? Cutting the internet, huge cords that lead to Europe. So all this needs is one or two more steps, and Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Trump, all they have to do is go, you don't give people freedom, so you don't get the platforms, and you don't get the internet. Bye. It's the same move. It's the same move.
The same thing on the opposite side, right?
Well, there's nothing we will miss. What do they offer?
What does who offer?
Like the Crown and Canada, or?
I don't know. I've argued on this show before, the opposite, I think, where I'm American. I don't want to have a monarch. But I do think that there's a lot of money to be made by having a monarchy just in tourism. That's why I feel that they wouldn't get rid of it. But maybe they will restructure the government and keep it as a figurehead and all, because the other aspect of this actually that we didn't even talk about is the church, right? The king is still the head of the Church of England. And at the same time, there's all the scandal happening in the British church.
I know.
So things really are breaking down all around. And I just feel like we're still in the middle of it. And I don't, after just experiencing the past few years, I feel like we'll never even hear the full story anyway.
Yeah.
We'll never know what's really actually happening. But what does matter is that people do not give away rights that we've earned or that we have by our legacy. That the idea of the American system was supposed to be to continue to be expanding rights and figuring out ways to live in today's world as free people, right? That does mean to find ways to include people who feel like they might be ostracized and all of those sorts of things. So I don't know what my point was with that, but I just feel like that right now, what we can control those little things. We can do our part to contribute to those struggles. but it feels like we're waiting for something else to happen.
Yeah, and what I feel, because it's very Pluto Aquarius, is cut off a technology. And also, if you think about it, like Tim Cook has just reached out to Trump in the last month, had calls. That's Apple. You have NVIDIA just announced all of their new AI technology, GPUs, CPUs, computers. Trump just announced yesterday $20 billion investment that's happening in America to build data centers in the Midwest and in the South, right? So if you think about the power of technology and the hardware, right? You force the UK, so you force all of everybody in Scotland, England, and in Ireland to go, well, good luck, because it's not like you're going to go to any English or European country. They don't make technology that's worthwhile. They don't have enough, right? All those companies have dissolved over the last 16 years. You got China. That's all that's left. And their Huawei and their, you know what I mean? And then any of the technology. So all they have to do is, in the name of freedom and expression, because your government's so tyrannical, there is no more access to any of the social media platforms that you guys want until you guys overthrow your government. And that seems so like the next evolutionary of Pluto Aquarius from 1776 and the beginnings of it, right? Of this idea of cut off the tea, cut off the tobacco, right? Like really piss them off. Throw it overboard. It's the same thing, but in a more new age way. It's the same thing. Cut them off.
So you're saying cut off the other countries?
Yeah, because we're not gonna miss a Land Cruiser or a Bentley. They run like crap, right? They're in the shop all the time. There's no domestic product that England is putting out. Even Cadbury eggs just got taken off the Monarch's approval list of like a special product. I couldn't believe it.
Why?
Nobody knows. Even Cadbury doesn't know, but that pissed me off. If I was English, I'd be pissed off enough already. I'd be like, you just took Cadbury for 100 years? I didn't know that the Monarch puts out like certain brands that it approves. It's almost kind of like Jewish and being kosher, but like, you know, that the Monarch approves, right? And they took Cadbury eggs off, or Cadbury the company, right?
I'm going to need to know why.
Right, so anyway, long story short is, what is it that America is desperate for in the UK, trade-wise? Nothing. Nada. Now, in Europe, there's some things, but definitely America could survive without European cars. And that's about it. The number one thing is vehicles. So all you have to do is go, sorry. And that will make people pissed, because what will happen is you guys don't do anything. You're a monarch with all this money and you don't invest into creating anything over here. You don't let us speak freely. You don't let us do anything. You force us to be locked down during COVID. Forced us to take shots. You made us do all this crazy crap, and you don't even offer us any innovative ways. There's no companies. You guys charge all these taxes that are extreme. So it's almost like, let's throw the old founding fathers idea on top of the people and take away what they've been so blessed to have because of freedom. Because that's where Mark Zuckerberg, what he said, is like the overarching, I feel like, way to get there is like, look at what they do, because it's true. In China, they only have WeChat. That's the only way that you can communicate in China, right? They don't let you get on Facebook and Instagram and do all those kind of things. We have the TikTok ban situation coming up, right? And it's funny because most people in Europe say, I only watch because of the American personalities in there, right? It's not, there are, I'm not to put down Europe, but There's not a lot of great personalities. There's some great channels, but the majority of people, I'm in my little country. I don't want to disturb the peace. I don't want to express myself too much, right? So not a lot of people are influencers or putting out content like they do in America, right? Like people live by it here. It's the new Hollywood now, right? So you have the entertainment aspect. You have all of it from all these different corners, and especially all of the future of even the military, right? Because guess who we sell all of our technologies to? The UK, Europe. So then you militarily pull back. NATO, bye-bye, sorry. That's the end of the monarchs. That's the end of, because even the Dutch have a monarch still, right? The United Kingdom, which is connected to Australia and to Canada. And so I feel like it was showing a doorway to something that people didn't ever believe could happen, that 100% can happen faster than we think in the next 4 months, the beginnings of seeing the events. Because based off the astrology that you brought up and that Nostradamus brings up, and I showed the quotes even of exactly what, we are hitting that by March 17th, which me on this network, I've been saying people, March 17th is the beginning of the X moment. And before there was an X app. And talking about the next turning, Saturn-wise, with this one, it begins. And the craziness of the nodes changing on January 11th into Pisces with Neptune there. With Saturn, it's bringing up the idea of civil war, which happened in America. But what it seems to me like is more of the international civil war of freedom and monarchs and republics. You even had, what's his name? Zelensky in Ukraine just go on Lex Friedman's podcast for 2.5, 3 hours. And in Ukraine, and they put it out in like 4 languages using AI with their own voice. It's really interesting. But it sounds from what Zelensky is saying that he's excited for Trump to end the war and put out what he wants in the negotiations, and how none of the countries, France, there was a agreement besides the Minsk Accords. There was the nuclear agreement, right, to use the nuclear weapons that's provided by, what's that country with a B that Russia is in bed with? Belarus or whatever, right, has nukes. And so there was a treaty like, hey, if something happens or somebody invades, you can use our nukes, right? Well, that didn't happen. And none of the 5 countries that support that, America, France, UK, China, and I forgot the other one, all did not come to the negotiating table and do the right procedures. And so Trump and Zelensky are talking about that with Putin, right? That, like, it's all getting to a point to where you have Zelensky going like, yeah, I'm ready for this to end. Here's some of the, like, he got all the money from Biden and now is exposing that it was under Obama that they fucked him, right? In 2014, or the country. And then what's been happening recently. So it's like, you have that whole other part of the pie now where it's like, well, the one country that can't be in NATO and can't be part of the UN, like, and be part of this whole thing, might get all the favor from America and then pull all the other countries out because they're all monarchs. So I think it's going to be, I think it's extremely possible. I don't think it's going to be fast. I agree with you on that. But I think that we're about to see the first blow in the next 3 months.
Well, what I was thinking is that really what we're also seeing, to connect back to the previous 2 Pluto returns, is this idea of a communications revolution. And in a lot of ways, social media was the best thing for governments, for governments to assert control over populations. And I think that's what we've seen, because now people's communication and the way and the information that everybody shared with each other it wasn't just the information out there like a book. Now you could see how people were consuming it and what they were doing with the information, how they're responding to it, right? And sure, there's a lot of people just making crazy comments or whatever out there, but for the first time, governments could see everything about how people, normal people, everyday people interact. And it was like our whole lives. And with the ability of Google and other corporations to acquire all of our information, the government also could access everything about us too, and our choices and all that. So I think what we're seeing is the first big push back against that. So like, if we don't have the freedom to control our own data, our own biology, and to have access to speaking with other people, then we don't have freedom, right?
Right.
And I think that's a big part of this. I mean, if you think about how it used to be that you could call up somebody, you could have phone conversations, and the government would have to go and get a warrant or whatever to wiretap, or I don't remember all that stuff from my civics class, right? That you would have to get an entry into people's lives to see what are people talking about. Now you can just sit there and watch people discuss everything openly. And I mean, think if you're one of the truth detectors or the people who were controlling what's in misinformation and not, those people saw everything. Right. And then so that's the issue, is that we're seeing how we're divided. We have this civil war sort of situation because it's partly been fanned by algorithms sending you and keeping people into different camps.
And censoring,
Yeah.
One side, not the other.
So, I mean, it's gotten to this point where something has to happen. And it's like a revolution of the communication is happening, along with revolutions of governments and corporations and whatever else. I know there's so much more out there, but it feels to me like the incomplete part, or why we have to revisit the American Revolutionary era, and maybe the era of the Reformation too, is that it's back to the communications issue of, because for Martin Luther it was, I don't think the church is doing all these things, and here's what I think is wrong with the church. And now I'm going to print this, and everybody can read what I think is wrong with the church. But they were going against the official truth that the church had established for, this is what you're supposed to say that you believe about the church. Right? And then we get to the era of the American Revolution, and it's, no, you can't, it doesn't matter if those things are true, and if that governor came and took your money. Yeah. It doesn't matter if that's true, because you're going against the government. You can't say that. Right? So, I don't know. Oh, go ahead. Oh,
no. Finish your thought.
No, I'm done.
What if I
always just want to hear what you say next.
And I get that, but it brings me to how the war ended, which was, of course, Benjamin Franklin and the Treaty of Paris. And it says right here, although Franklin demanded the cessation of Canada to be an independent America, he knew that the British government of Lord Shelburne, opposed to American independence, was unprepared to accept that offer. 2 months of hard bargaining resulted in a preliminary articles of peace in which the British accepted American independence and boundaries, resolved the difficult issues of fishing rights of the Newfoundland banks and the pre-war debts owed British creditors, promised restitution of property lost during the war by Americans loyal to the British cause, and provided for the evacuation of British forces from the 13 states. Right? So that's how it finally comes to its full end. And the preliminary articles signed in Paris on November 30th, 1782 were only effective when Britain and France signed a similar treaty, which the French foreign minister quickly negotiated. France signed preliminary articles of peace with Great Britain on January 20th. We're about to have the sun Pluto. Right? Finally make their conjunction January 21st. Right? Followed by a formal peace of agreement. But it's interesting to me because that negotiation that actually started when the British and Cornwallis started to surrender, and then the French were upset that Benjamin Franklin went to the English to negotiate with them. And when they were in negotiations, it came up about Canada, and then it came up about the fishing in the oceans, but they didn't know how big Canada was yet either, right? But what's interesting is like, it does feel like the original intention, and now this is where I'm going to go, there is no history for this. This is totally my own opinion and theoretical and mystical thing. That I've believed that there is something we don't know that the executive office has, that there is a pamphlet that is left for every president of the United States since George Washington, of Benjamin Franklin's first want and need to, when the time comes, if you are president, to take Canada as the American independent place that Benjamin Franklin and the founding fathers wanted to have.
But
and
did
that
they
this
want
moment,
Canada, or they wanted it to be its own independent country, like America?
to an independent America. No, it was going to be part of it. They wanted it a part of it. They wanted to expand up.
Well, they wanted America, the continent, to be independent.
Well, they didn't
So
want
they
they
could have
didn't
their
want
own
the
country.
British around at all. They didn't want them to be able to do an 1812, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about it, you're right. The monarch probably won't go, but the negotiation of Canada is the only way to say you can keep your islands.
Yeah.
Right? Like, have fun on your little island. Your time here is done. That's the negotiation. You want internet, you want fuel, you want protection, you want goods, you want all this. We're going to buy Canada, as it was supposed to be the last time Pluto was in Aquarius here. So to me, seeing the Canada purchase or expansion is not crazy at all. It's exactly what was talked about the last time we were here astrologically.
Or Canadian independence. They just need
No,
their
it's gonna. It
revolution.
would be American. That's what Benjamin Franklin
Well,
wanted.
I guess we're all the Confederate States of America, or I don't. What do you call it? A Confederation of States?
No,
of
I mean
America?
they even put it out, the 51st state. Or Trump just tweeted all of Canada and America and showed it as the United States of America.
Well, maybe it will be. I don't know. But see, to me, then that starts to become a little too much like Napoleon.
Or, well, is it? I mean, that's what they were saying about the purchase of Louisiana Purchase. Like, oh, you're trying to expand too much. Can we handle all this? And then, of course, the Civil War was started because of those new territories from the Louisiana Purchase about slavery. So to avoid that, you make it a 51st state like Alaska. Wait, we purchased Alaska. We purchased Hawaii. We didn't go to war for those, right?
I just thought of, what we need to look at? This is so funny.
What?
Is Texas.
Well, that was the
Because-
Mexican-American War, but yeah.
But I'm just saying that Texas was, it's funny because now I know, because my son goes to college in Texas, that they have to take a class on the history of the government of Texas. It's not even the history of Texas. And
The Lone Star
And
State.
then they learn how it was its own country or republic.
Correct.
First. So I mean, so that might be a model.
And they have a different clause when they became a state with the federal government of the United States of America, of their ability to secede to, if it feels that it doesn't want to be part anymore and it goes away from its intention. You have to remember the Battle of the Alamo, right? Like, it wasn't about the win because so many people died.
I think you talked about the
Right.
Alamo and something, right?
Right, but it's about the idea of standing the ground no matter what for freedom, right? And against all the Mexicans that were raping and killing and doing it to anybody that was in that area, right? And including they were killing Native American Indians too, right? And they were using Mother Mary or Lady of Guadalupe as their heroic protector in the war.
But don't you think it's funny though that Zuckerberg's going to Texas and makes this big point of, I'm going to Texas.
He's moving a bunch of servers and people to Texas because he's afraid of what Newsom's now going to do, California. Then in Canada this week, a liberal party head started saying, well, Cascadia, California, Oregon, and Washington should be part of Canada then. Right? So they're trying to say that back. But at the end of the day, that's not going to happen.
Well, isn't it interesting that these are even conversations that are happening right now?
Just like Benjamin Franklin had.
It's
sitting, and of course, he had to sit with John Adams, our second president, and our first vice president, who was a horrible negotiator because he was a Scorpio who literally did not understand how to talk to people.
But I think they were sent, their contingency or whatever, they were sent to France around this same time.
Right.
In this, astrologically, this time.
Yeah.
So,
and that's where
comes back to Benjamin.
That's where the idea though comes is Benjamin Franklin's the one who fights for Canada. And then if you remember, that's actually where finally Benjamin Franklin and John Adams find commonality about the English are ready to finally give us our sovereignty. We need to have that area to protect us because we don't know if they're going to try to come back and reinvade us now. So that's where they find commonality is Canada. And it was not a defined territory with a governor or anything. It was just a territory that the British had, right? With posts. There was just outposts. Not a lot of people.
And there were a lot of French missions up there too.
Right. So to me, it's kind of interesting because it's bringing the history back fully. I think Canada became a thing that nobody thought it would. And I think the Canadian people have been duped into believing the whole time that they're this independent nation when they're not. They are a wing and a full wing of the monarch with the illusion of the parliamentary system of a parliamentary monarch system of rule that has a governor general who just didn't allow the minority party or did allow the minority party to have the prime minister who happens to be part of that resign and close parliament so they can find a new person to represent them. So you're shutting down the whole entire way in government during these hostile times and the finances out of control, the people living the worst they ever have in Canada in all time, their dollar the lowest, the ability to find a home, pricing on homes, food, gasoline, all the woke stuff that's been forced upon that. Their healthcare system's the same as far as like you have to wait months to years sometimes for a surgery. You have to always be in a line like the NHS in the United Kingdom. It's all been a scam. And so Benjamin Franklin's coming back, right?
Always Benjamin Franklin. So he was a Canadian patriot.
But I just think that's the craziest part of the history is that the end of the war came down to the agreement of him and the other delegate saying, okay, you can have that area, Canada, and we'll take to where Maine is today. And so, like that's the boundary line. And it came to bite us back in the War of 1812, right? Because that's when they came through a bunch of Michigan and through the big Great Lakes, right? From Canada and worked their way in and burned the White House down. So we have to remember that at the end of the day in American culture, the British are not our friends. The only time that we became friends was World War I and World War II, right? And obviously now you have the worst prime minister of all time in Canada and the worst prime minister of all time in the United Kingdom. I mean, there's a bust of the best prime minister that sits in the White House Is there going to be a bust of Justin Trudeau? Is there going to be a bust of Steimer? Never. Right? They're everything that's anti-American. And about grooming children, weird sex stuff. Plus, remember, the Pope had to go on his apology tour, Pope Francis, who's still Pope, to Canada and apologize to the 300,000 or 400,000 children that had been raped by Catholic priests in Canada alone.
When's he going to come apologize to the kids here?
They've done those tours, but
Pope
Pope John Paul II.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But think of that. Canada is at a place where the same way of the immigration system taking its just craziness and over and refugees all the time, and then making a system where you have to rely on the government. You don't print enough money to actually get out of debt as a country, but you also don't print enough money for anybody in the country to actually make it. And that's what you've seen in 4 years in America, that this is the massive blowback response that's going to explode. And redefining of the world is what Saturn Neptune at 0 point of Aries is in 2026, the last time that we defined Babylon. So, and the idea of what astrologers, Rosicrucians, and anybody with a conscience have always fought for, which is trying to get the world as close to a republic and not a monarch ever, or a religious leader ahead. But that's what's kind of scary about the monarch, is it is the head of the church and of the state, which is exactly the main part of the separation of powers in America and the republic. Is no church head and no state head could ever be as one person. And there will be no head of religion here. There will be no, right? So it's weird to me that they make people in those countries feel like, even Australia, like, oh yeah, you guys have your freedom. No, you don't. Obviously not. Look at how COVID was. And what's scary to me is, like, you even had the last Governor General of Canada was against astrology. It was in her saying. She was an astronaut, and she was like, it's because of this world that people believe in astrology that it's going down the hill, and I'm going to make sure. And then she just got in a lot of trouble during COVID, and they got a new Governor General. But she implicitly was against astrology.
Interesting.
So yeah, I think we're at a very interesting moment here, and I think the astrology and schism, because that's the other thing that is guaranteed with Pluto and Aquarius, is a schism, some leaving behind of an authoritative, structured thing that everybody thinks would never happen. There's always the like the disbelief is higher than the belief. Right, so the disbelief that Canada could become a 51st state is more plausible than the belief that it won't. Right, because the same way of, like, there's no way these 13 colonies and these people with pitchforks and, whatever are going to win against the British Navy and Army and the best general. Right? Or the same thing is, there's no way that King Henry VIII can get away with leaving the Catholic Church and the Pope. Oh, yes, he can. And he can annul the marriage, and he can marry, and he can chop off the head of that wife and get another one. And another one. And another one. And still be a Christian.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at, is like, the more out of control, insane, and disbelief, the more that's more the target of happening. So when you're seeing the disbelief of, I can't believe Mark Zuckerberg's making Facebook and Instagram free of speech and to express yourself, and then all these countries are just taking away all your rights and freedoms. That's just bullshit. That's horrible. Oh, no, it's not. That disbelief is true right now at this moment. So I'm excited because unfortunately it looks like those countries, like I said this for years, and you know this, I said, Pluto Aquarius will be about whether Australia and Canada will finally wake the fuck up and rebel like America did.
Yep.
That's what Pluto and Aquarius is about. And the fact that right away this is already starting has been the greatest moment as an astrologer I could ever feel. That Nostradamus is the best astrologer that ever lived.
He said this is the end. This is the last big time, right? Or this is the end of his prophecies?
It depends on how you read it.
Okay.
Because he does go back. He even changes the date of when Christ was born too, and the calendar back then, of course, the Julian calendar. And so when he talks about the 3,797 years, right? People forget that he's also including Jesus moment, right? So BC times. So if you think of where we're at astrologically and using his 1555 chart, his 1732 chart, which he teaches his son to see the changing, we are in the exact, and I've shown it on Deep Astrology for the last 3 weeks, we're on the same heliocentric turn as Earth around the sun, around the same corner with Mars and Venus, both on our same on both sides of us as 1555. We're coming into the same Venus retrograde. We're coming in at the same time that Saturn's ingressing into Aries. We're coming into it with so many of the same markers that it's overwhelming, right? That at the same token, we are also coming into the 1732 chart. So if you were Nostradamus and you knew both those charts and you knew them at the same time happening, what would that be? It would be the end and the beginning. It would be the reemergence of a republic and the end of a monarchy, and it would be famines and it will be plagues at the same time as the opening door to a new world that would be about republics and freedom against the tyranny of monarchs and religions over people.
Right. Yeah, and we haven't even talked about the religious aspect in this show, really, because what's interesting is that the Pope is playing a role right now in the news, right? And also this whole idea of holy wars that we've talked about too, that it's all converging right now in this time.
Yeah. And then there's the question of the new frontier of space and what's really going on up there. I mean, even the Las Vegas Cybertruck Green Beret active duty member who just blew himself up, it's verified, but the news doesn't talk about it. He wrote an email and talked to that one guy who's on X who talks to people in the military because he's ex-military about corruption, wrote 2 days prior to him saying, here's the reason why I'm going to do this. Don't release this till January 1st. And it's all about the drone situation, that it's China and that they're getting ready to attack us. They're not going to attack us on this little run, but it was a test. I've retweeted it on my thing. And then he went to the FBI and showed the FBI all of it. And the FBI knows all of this. And then it got the highest of Army intelligence involved, where they didn't even know what he meant by the car bomb and the expression of it. And we're being lied to by the fucking government on TV because they know it's all verified. Like, it's all right there that literally the dude, his whole thing was, I want to get attention because people aren't paying attention. He killed himself it blowed it up to make people like go, oh, okay, Elon Musk, like the fucking Cybertruck, Trump Tower, what's going on? And the blow up and his message that he wanted released, which he did. And then the guy who didn't know who this guy is, who does this, gave it to the FBI and gave it to all these other channels and has proven it on his phone and has shown it. And the FBI has proven it. And then the Army intelligence got involved because people have to wake up. That's insane that people right now are just like, he was just, upset because he was with his girlfriend and blah, 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 and he was sad or whatever. You don't do something like that over that. Yeah. Especially if you know what's going on. He also talks about there was a 2019 mission with drones that he was part of as Green Beret, because Green Beret also does do drone work, and, that was done, and that the UN called as a bad thing, and he helped cover that stuff up. And he brings that up in the letter too. So it is interesting because I feel that, whether you got Macron who invited Trump to Notre Dame, and he's been the guy who's been, let's bring France back to being a military power in the world, right? And has been very forthright in going to China and about Ukraine and brought Zelensky. And if you think about it, France is in the middle of this all over again and friends with America and wanting to be. It's wild.
Yeah, it is.
And all you need is a connection of the monarchy supporting either the Middle East or something like that, which they do in many ways.
Yeah, but bringing up that story of the guy in the Cybertruck situation is just another reminder of how much people have lost their voice in this world right now, and why it's important to be advocating for actual free speech that's productive, because free speech makes it so you don't have to blow yourself up to get attention, right? Or you don't have to murder people publicly or assassinate folks, right? That we need to have a truly free and open exchange of ideas without an effort to stop us from thinking what we think, or without the effort to confuse us all, to think that the truth is hate, or if somebody questions that it's hateful.
So I don't know if you saw the article yesterday that the Cybertruck bombing guy used ChatGPT to figure out how to do the bombs. So what it's saying is, after this conversation today, that if we were to take this back 250 years ago, that some bad event happened because some guy used the printing press, this new idea of the printing press. And so the printing press is bad. Only people who should use the printing press, who we determine should use the printing press. That's what they're saying.
Right. I mean,
does that make sense?
Because Henry VIII, for all of his great breaking from Rome, he killed William Tyndale, who printed the English Bible, right? It's, oh, good, we have a press, but don't be printing that. Don't do that. We don't want people to actually read the Bible themselves. We're telling them what to believe. Yeah. I mean, it's, to me as a historian, hanging out with an astrologer, it's so obvious. It just is so disturbing to see similar trends, but also interesting to see the way that it's playing out right now.
Or the irony in King Henry's karma that a Stuart, right, would be the one that would eventually end up becoming the king of both Scotland and England and be the one to print the first monarch, head of Church of England Bible that goes around the world, the King James Bible.
Yeah, interesting.
That it could have been a Tudor Bible, it could have been a King Henry Bible, but for some reason he wanted to follow the old way that Martin Luther was calling out in parts of his thesis, right? Of like, people can't even read this Latin unless you go to the church, like all this crazy stuff, like this whole, and you have the moment where you can and you choose to follow exactly what the Pope's doing. Like, oh, no, you have to go to our church and you need to be part of this new system, and you're not going to be able to own that Bible on your own. Like, it's only for our priests. It's only for our clergy. So you have to show up and pay and give everything that you got to us energetically and monarchy, the money-wise, and then you don't get to take it home. So in many ways, I think it's funny because it's a Stuart, right? And it's James who does eventually become, which would have probably rotted every Tudor to their core.
Yeah, but then...
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny that then when you said Stuart, the first thing I was thinking of was Stuarts. You mean the Catholic monarchs? I'm thinking, James II. By that time, the Stuarts get kicked out of England because they've become Catholic. And...
Yeah, I was going farther back.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the issue of, this is not for this show.
War of the
it's a whole
Roses
other
stuff.
issue. It's just that in 1788 or 1778 is what I mean. They're already doing toleration for Catholics in England because when France entered the war on the side of America, they decided, hey, we can't. It's so interesting to see how governments just change their positions to try to maintain control. And I feel like we see that a lot these days, right?
Right.
But what was happening in England was they decided we've got to give Catholics some toleration because they hadn't been tolerated since that time that the Catholic kings were kicked out. But there was a worry that with France on the side of America, Catholics would start to turn against England within England, and that, or in Ireland, and that the French would be able to come over and launch a rebellion or within England because of the people who were sympathetic to Catholics or who were Catholic. So,
yeah, I think that's where that's funny, because the War of the Roses and the war, that 100-year war, and the idea of who's the monarch and all these monarchs in the struggle to hold the crown, right? And that's where you get all these different names, right? You have these houses, right? The Stuart house, you have the Tudors, that you get all these people that are fighting for it. And then it becomes this irony at the end of the day where, one of your old ancient ancestors is the one who ends up bringing that first Bible in that you were against in the past. And also from Scotland, which your ancient Edward I would have died, rolled in his grave, right? Right? That a Scottish, royal is in England as the head of that church now, but has the lines of both within him. But it's it's interesting because that's kind of the irony of maybe 50 to 100 years from now, is that idea of something right now that's happening, the irony of what you used to be against or whatever comes back to do the right thing, that we can't see right now. But, the battles that are happening now or whatever that would be atrocious, I couldn't believe that could ever happen, will in the future from now, 100 years from now or whatever. But I wanted to show this as the end, because this is where the astrology gets really weird. So Canada's parliament is prorogued, right? Is that how you say it? Prorogued. So it doesn't come back. So the politicians will not debate or pass any laws, and it's put on pause and won't be returning until March 24th. I just want to show you the astrology for March 24th of this year.
So funny. These things are happening right around dates that you've already talked about.
I know.
Interesting.
I know. So Venus retrograde in Aries will already have been underway. Mercury retrograde in Aries in the Cazimi with the Sun, after the Sun and Venus just had their Cazimis day prior. Neptune at the very last degree of Pisces, 2947, about to cross the threshold that caused the Civil War the last time it did. The North Node at the midpoint between Saturn and Neptune's conjunction that's building at 27 degrees, and Saturn in the North Node. The Moon and Pluto in Aquarius, it will be feeling this new Aquarian energy and bringing back all the Benjamin Franklin stuff of wanting Canada back. Uranus will be direct, and Jupiter will be, direct. And, Uranus is on its way already into Gemini, which now brings us truly into the Pluto Aquarian revolutionary times, right? So we have to remember 2025 is the year of Uranus ingressing into Gemini, which forms the same transit of the revolution itself into the war, into the actual Treaty of Paris, which the fight over Canada becomes about. And Mars will be out of retrograde, and this is going to be the most extreme zone because Venus is going to take a long journey back into conjuncting Neptune in retrograde for the second time, and meet with the North Node and Saturn, and station on top of Saturn in Pisces, and then station direct, and then watch. So the North Node's going to watch all these planets in Pisces move in, Mercury, Venus retrograde back from Aries into Pisces, watch Saturn and Neptune go into Aries, all as we come into that spring. This is going to be the wildest time in the wilderness of the universe of all time, is from March 20th until the solstice. It will be the craziest things we will ever see in our whole entire lives that you could even not possibly imagine. Everything that you disbelieve will happen. Every convergence will converge that has, right? So I also think AI will have singularity at that point too, faster than years from now, which is going to make that all happen, this whole convergence thing. And the ability to open up to multi-dimensional timelines in the idea of that beginning will be seeded.
Wow.
So it's not just some little moment, oh, Canada's just going to come back and it's going to be all normal and just have this. And no way. But that's redefining it completely.
Well, what is Canada's current, what's its chart? Do they have one?
Yeah, we can look it up. So what
does this mean for Canada?
Mundane Dana, Canada. I'll have to find it this way. Here we go. Oh, you're not going to show it? Oh, there we go. View. I hear it. It's right here. I got it. View chart. Here we go. Oh, I've looked at this chart. It's been a long time since I looked at this chart. This country was ready to die and be reborn. Being born with Saturn opposite Pluto, okay? Saturn, Scorpio, Pluto, and Taurus. So Uranus is right near that Pluto. It just finally finished that transit at 15 degrees. Mars retrograde happened over the Mercury. Mars retrograde is in Cancer. It's a Cancer country too. But it's Sun and Uranus. It changes its alliance. It's meant to change its alliance. And always. It's the same signature as Trump, Sun-Uranus conjunction.
What? That's crazy.
Right? Then it's in square to Neptune in Aries. Where's Neptune coming in 2025? Aries, the return of Neptune. And it never has been defined correctly. An Aries ascendant with Neptune on it, it's never felt defined correctly. And it will always have this odd definition, meaning how weird would it be that a whole country, but that's bigger than most countries in the world, that has less than a population of the amount of people in California, a state, would join a union and be the 51st state and be the biggest state that would be as big as a country that literally goes to the North Pole. That's so Neptune on the ascendant in Aries with the big square to the sun Uranus. So where the people feel more at home at. And they don't feel at home right now. Because they've always thought that they were like Americans because they can come here and do all this stuff. And they used to be able to come back and it used to be like, okay, not anymore. And so if you also think of where did all the Venus, because you know you're fascinated by the Venus transits of 2004 and 2012. Where did they happen? At the teens of Gemini. And where was the natal Venus of Canada? At the exact place right there in Gemini. Venus in Gemini at 15 degrees. Where did those happen? Right there. 17, 15, right in there. 2004, 2012. The eclipses of Venus, the transit of Venus happened right in the natal position of the Venus of Canada. And Jupiter is about to conjunct that space and close out the transit of Venus. And Mars already retrograded through there, so that's a close, but Jupiter's the main doorway opening of what the close was. So the door's already been closed on Canada. It's where's the new door opening. Plus with Saturn, Neptune ingressing into Aries, it has Chiron. It has Chiron return with Justin Trudeau.
And what's his sign? What is he?
He's a Libra, Capricorn vibe, right? So he's very Newsom.
Is Newsom also Capricorn something? I mean, he's
Newsom's
a
Libra, but I think he has.
We talked about this before. I don't remember.
Yeah, and well, it's funny because Justin Trudeau's chart, just to look at it for a sec, and then we already know King Charles. He's born as a Scorpio with a moon in Taurus, a full moon lunar eclipse in Taurus, and we didn't get a lunar eclipse in Taurus going back, or a solar eclipse in Taurus, right, since the 80s, but we got one 2 years ago. And then he was stupid enough to do his whole entire coronation, just as William Lilly warned Charles II to not do it on a lunar eclipse, and the motherfucker did it on a lunar eclipse. And he's a lunar eclipse. Right? And now here's Uranus finishing in Taurus. Now Pluto's in Aquarius, starts squaring all that stuff. But oh yeah, it's so funny. Or that's Astro theme. I want Astro. There we go. Here's Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Capricorn on Christmas. Right? Moon in Aries, so his moon sits on that ascendant and Neptune. He has Mars that sits at 0 or 29 Pisces. Oh, it's so easy to see the North Node crossing over his Mars in the 8th. There's more corruption coming out on Justin Trudeau. I can't say it on air because if you look into what, I won't even tell you the person who sent me this info about Justin Trudeau and the finance administrator and why she resigned and what he's been putting money into. I can't even say the name on here. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. There's a lot more of why he resigned than that. He also, if we know that Saturn and Pluto are in opposition, Scorpio and Taurus, he doesn't have those in his chart. He also was born with Saturn at the beginning of Gemini there. And so, he's been in his Saturn square. I know for sure he's been in his progressed balsamic phase for the last couple of years. He's born in 71, so he's 13 years older than me. So he's 54? For 53, he just turned 53. So you just add 53 degrees to his 3-degree Capricorn. You add 30, you get to 3 Aquarius. You add 20, you get to 23 Aquarius. And then you add 3, 26 Aquarius. So his progressed sun is at 26 Aquarius right now. And kind of a weird zone, not really like he had his moment with his progressed sun sextile that Jupiter when it was at 21 degrees. He won a couple years back. He thought he knew it all. He thought he had it all under control 5 years ago. He doesn't now. Oh, look at that. And his natal Venus is at the beginning of Aquarius, and it didn't hit his 3-degree Venus. Is that 3 degrees? I think it is. Yep, 3-degree Venus. That's where Venus stations and retrogrades, and or Pluto stations and retrogrades at 3 degrees of Aquarius this year. And his north node's right there. And remember, I've told anybody with a north node in Aquarius, they're going to have the biggest, hardest moment of destiny. Pluto on the north node is insane. And he has natal Venus there. So this was easy. Plus, he was born with Mercury in Sag, and this was a long Mercury retrograde, and it stayed in Sag the last 2.5 months. And he resigned with Mercury in Sag at the very end. Oh, man. Square his Mars. Oh, man. Yeah, so this guy's not for the people. He has the moon in Aries in direct opposition to that Uranus in his chart. I do whatever I want, but he puts himself out there like, what do you mean I do what you want? No, he does whatever he wants. Moon opposite Uranus people don't follow what anybody wants them to do.
Really?
Especially moon in Aries. I'm not doing what you want. And it's all about money and hidden things. So Pluto's going to expose all that on his Venus. But going back to Canada's chart, I would say that, this is definitely, look at this, Jupiter, Neptune. It was formed in 1867, right? So Jupiter was heading towards Neptune in the next year, and Jupiter and Neptune were conjunct in that first house, meaning we just had the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in Pisces, right, in 2022, that since 2022, it's been falling apart. In the 12th house, it happened in the 12th house of Canada's chart. And they're born as an approaching Jupiter to Neptune, right? And so now that Jupiter and Neptune are going to finish their square, and when Jupiter comes into Cancer in the summer, it's going to start making the trine the square to Neptune, and it's going to bring up the Jupiter-Neptune's conjunction in the first quarter square, and it's a balsamic conjunction. So the prior one is the one that you and I did, the one that was in 1854, right? Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in Pisces. That's still the transit that was closing out in 1867 from the prior Jupiter-Neptune that was in Pisces, waiting for the Aries one. So if you think that Jupiter and Neptune met in Pisces, it resets the whole Jupiter-Neptune Pisces one the last time that had happened in the inception and the ideas of Canada.
Wow. Very interesting.
So
where is that Venus? In which degree of Gemini is it?
15 degrees, right in the middle of...
What date would that be about? Is it
15 degrees? June 4th?
So I was looking at, because Liz Spirit in the comments had said, look at Pierre Poilievre. I don't know how to say his name. The guy who's the head of the opposition, who's in the Conservative Party, who I've heard people say that he may become the next prime minister. I don't know how it all works in Canada. But she mentioned, look at his chart, but he was born June 3rd. 1979.
Yeah, and it could be June 3rd or June 4th. It depends. 15, it depends on the year. What year was he born?
1979.
1979. So he wasn't born in a leap year. And this wasn't a leap year either. 67. Well, so, that's what's interesting, right? So Justin Trudeau, his Saturn's in Gemini and sits on the Venus and the moon, right? So the other thing is Canada is lost. The moon's at 29 degrees Gemini in Canada's chart. So Neptune and the North Node right now are about to conjunct, squaring the moon, the whole foundation, and the idea of Canada's home and its idea of what it is. It doesn't even know what it is because it has Neptune on the ascendant in Aries. It doesn't even know what it is. And where's Chiron and where did the total solar eclipse hit this year? Boom, right in the first house, 19 degrees, right in the first house, right? Man, this is the end of the... say goodbye to the maple leaf. It's not going to
They
be.
can keep their maple leaf on their state flag.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think will happen, and the monarch will stay in England, but then you're going to see the big revolt of the Australians next.
You've been saying that.
China's gonna try and take that over. That's why we've given all of our subs and the submarine technology to Australia to protect it, because all of this, I think, has been in the plans for a long time. That China's going to go after Australia because there's no defense down there. And the monarch knows it's going to lose both, just like it lost India. It's like it lost the colonies. So what's the other thing that England's going to lose? Just like it lost the Pluto Aquarius, it lost the 13 colonies. It's bread and butter. It's prime, the new world that Christopher Columbus, the Spaniards fucking found. That they got the piece of, the biggest piece of, they lost. So the biggest piece of the pie that the United Kingdom has is Canada. They're going to lose it. Same zone, same place, same thing. Oh, I love it. This is going to be great. I love astrology and history. It's so easy.
I'm glad it's easy for you. I can't teach any of this stuff, so it'll be in the middle of the semester when this all starts unfolding for me. And I'll be teaching world history.
Well, I mean, you could teach about the Treaty of Paris and like what was the English's way of convincing Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, and John Adams in order to sign it and give them Canada, right? Like that's an interesting thing to do a lecture of, especially in this moment, because I think a lot of people have no idea that's how Canada exists today, right? That you kind of have to go to the source moment of its determination. So the chart of that is one thing, but the real occurrence is happening right now. It was originally negotiated to be the independent America, no British rule allowed. But something happened in that treaty, and I think it was just the fight and the cost and the French issue with what it took to get the 13 colonies, that at the end of the day, it was like, we won. Let's take the win. Right? Now, since we've already won, and we've won for 248 years, it's time to liberate the people of the world that are too afraid to do it themselves. Because they're too scared. They're going to just go to their, what is that place called that they all eat in Canada? Their Tim Hortons. And have their horrible Canadian money that's not worth shit, and listen to all the woke craziness and watch their prime minister wear pink and go to Barbie with his son. That's not what they signed up for. And they all didn't sign up for the requirement of a French on every label and in every country, every province, forced to have French on everything, when only the people in Quebec speak it. Think of that. So then there's the French part of it that they make it be like, we're French. It's a French thing. No, it's not. It's the monarch of England. There's no French connection anymore. Right? And that goes into the French and American War, or the French-Indian War, which is all connected to George Washington.
Well, it also could go into the French Revolution.
Yeah, I know.
We'll see Quebec form its own country too. If things split up or become rearranged, it might go off and decide to be its own thing too.
Yeah, it'll be called the country called Pfizer, Quebec Pfizer. Because Quebec's crazy. They're like the most liberal, craziest place. They make California look weak.
They have good food, and I like it, and it's a nice place to visit.
It used to be. Now it's scary.
I haven't been there recently, so And they have poutine. They have good fries with gravy.
Yeah, and they can keep all those traditions. It's kind of like having a snow cone at a Ohio fair. But
the Texas
but
fair.
it's going to be interesting to see the resistance to freedom by people who are entrapped, just like the Uyghurs are in China. So, well, that was a good show.
Yes, it was.
I'll probably get some
Canada.
flack for this one, but I think it was worth it.
Yes. I mean, and really it does feel like we're waiting to see what's next. So we'll have another show at the end of March and see where we are on all of this.
I know, freedom is going to be crazy. And there is no such thing as true freedom without it looking crazy. And the biggest disbeliefs coming real. Yeah. And that's actually, if you want to like end it on that note, that's the interesting psychological part of Pluto, is that people repress and are actually conditioned in the disbelief, meaning like that there's no way, you're talking crazy, that will never happen. It's so psychological on the populace and on the society, and Pluto and Aquarius is like, whatever's at the bottom of your repression and your psychology of your mind, Aquarius, well, I'm going to get to the bottom of all those little CIA, little implants, and all the things that you've been shown with Neptune at the end of Pisces that you've believed in the media and that you were told by your fake country that's really owned and controlled by the king, and that you're being used and taxed and saying we got free health care, but you live like shit. You're not even allowed to speak loud at a restaurant. The decorum in Canada is be quiet. Don't speak. Don't say to... I know I got in trouble in Canada for talking not even as loud as I'm talking to you. I was passionate about talking about something. And the waiter came up and told me, "Sir, in Canada, we don't speak loud in a restaurant, and you can't disturb other tables." And I remember, I think I've told the story. I got held at the Canadian border for 5 hours in a cell, crossing the border because I was an astrologer.
What?
Right?
Why'd they do that?
Because one, it was also the week of the election, right, in 2016. And so they, at first, were like, "Well, are you trying to dodge into this country?" Right? I'm like, "No, I'm voting for Trump." "What are you talking about?" "I do not want to live here." Then they were like, "You are doing astrology. So if you're going to come in here, no astrology allowed." I'm like, "I'm leaving." So on my passport, it's on there. "I'm leaving in 4 days. I'm doing a show with Rick Levine in Seattle, Washington, Redmond, in Seattle-ish area of Washington. And I have to be there. So I'm only in this country for 4 days. Okay? And I won't do any astrology here. I'm not doing any astrology talks. I'm not doing a lecture. Of course, I'm doing my videos, but I didn't tell them that. Right? And so finally, after 5 hours, and they went through my whole entire F-150, pulled everything out, pulled the back seat off the back of it, looked at everything, pulled everything out of the back of the truck. And then when I got back to my truck with my ex-wife, literally I had to repack everything in the truck. It was the most insane. The Canadian fucking Mountie were the fucking biggest dickheads ever and investigated me, and they found for sure through my Twitter at the time that I was doing the show with Rick Levine on that date. I had the flyer, and that was the only way they were going to let me in. And they never told me why, because I asked, like, am I not allowed to do astrology in Canada? And that's what opened me up to find, when I searched on Google about it, the Governor General was against astrology in Canada. Then I found out that, they were like really crazy about the border, which we should be in America, about letting anybody Americans in because people wanted to leave. When they found out that I was a Trumper, they were like, we need to hold them even more so now, because I was going into British Columbia. And then I found out you remember with the Maldives situation, and then I found out that they weren't going to let me into the Maldives, that I'm not allowed around most of this world being an astrologer, including Canada. I was held for 5 hours in a prison at the border and grilled. And I remember laughing at them. They tried to find everything from drugs to they tried to find anything they could to keep me away. And I'm like, I won't do astrology. And that was my ticket out, is I won't do astrology. That's a true story.
Well, now
the truest it could ever be of all time. And it's on my Instagram somewhere, me going live in Canada after leaving and talking about it. It's in 2016.
Were you doing astrology while you were talking? Did you lie?
Of course. What do they, I mean, I was like, what? Fucking arrest me for fucking talking about astrology. They didn't want me to do astrology, like do it, lecture about it, be in front of people, run charts, do any of that kind of shit.
Now that we've seen the chart of Canada, we know why. They didn't want you to see to uncover the Neptune on the rising, or, you know.
Yeah, it was weird because I'm sitting in the cell. My ex-wife is like Canadian, like freaking out. And then they won't even let her fucking talk to me either, right? So I'm like in this cell and I see one of the border royal Mountie guys literally on a computer like this. They went out and I see my Twitter and he's on my Facebook and then he's on Google and reading every article about me. I'm like, what the fuck? And back in 2016, we all know I was saying Trump was going to win the election, right? And started just mouthing off the astrological truth about the Neptune South Node and the whole age of deception I had just done, and saying that this place is corrupt all over the world about the media. I started saying that Justin Trudeau's a false thing. I started saying all this stuff that wasn't crazy, that was actually going to come true, that we're seeing right now. And it's crazy that guy spent 5 hours doing that, and then they had 4 people out there. My brand new F-150 Platinum lifted on BDS 6-inch lift, okay? With some Toyo mud terrains on there, some 35s, fucking with some fucking baths. It was sick. Ramsacked the whole fucking thing and pulled all my equipment because I brought the equipment to Rick's show and then I did the show in Portland on election night. So I was doing a loop around to go to my ex-wife and see all of her family and all that stuff and then come down to Vancouver in the 4-day trip, and fucking they were not down with that shit. So that's it woke me up so much being in Canada and realizing it's the weakest country I've ever been to in my life. The people there are so repressed, they can't even speak their truth at a restaurant. They can't even say, like, there's nobody can even celebrate in a restaurant and be like, happy birthday. Everybody's just in their corner. And I remember my ex-mother-in-law telling me, like, yeah, people are so, And I remember being like, I can't believe it's true. I asked every single time I went to buy liters of gasoline with my lifted truck, I would be nice and just be like, yeah, let me get, 80 on pump 2 or whatever. And like, how's your day going? Every time I went to Tim Hortons, I'd walk inside and every old man that ever lived in Canada just sits in Tim Hortons for 6 hours and reads a newspaper and doesn't say a word. The people behind the counter don't say anything either. It's the weirdest. There is no social life unless you go to like Vancouver downtown to like a nice restaurant. That's like where it's allowed. But like in the common areas and most head down, you go to the grocery store there, I felt like I was going to fucking like the oldest Walmart in like the middle of like Arkansas in the nicest parts of Canada. Everybody's like desperate for water and food and eggs. It felt like I was in Mexico. But it looks nice. Canada? It looks nice though.
Well, I was at Costco in Quebec, and it was really nice. I liked it.
I mean, that's like if you were to do Hunger Games, that's where the main district is.
Okay.
Right? So that's where.
But then I saw the fireworks show and everything in Ottawa. That's their capital. I'm losing it.
You know the only
but
way.
It was really nice hanging out with people on the grass and watching the show in the summertime. But I don't know where you were, so maybe
I was all through British Columbia, which is a huge province.
I only have been to a conference there where I presented a paper and
Kelowna. I forgot the name of that lake town that's where the Loch Ness Monster is. Pepatika was something. Some Canadian will know. But it was like, I went through Vancouver, I went through Chinatown, I went through downtown, I've done the Canada thing. And I drove through it too. So I literally was testing every gas station, every Tim Hortons, every grocery store, every restaurant. And nobody, you know me, I'm the kind of person I'll walk into a store and be like, what up? Like, I don't even know the salesman. We're going to be best friends. Nobody's doing that. Everybody's quiet. Stay in your lane. Even when you live like in a nice area like Kelowna, like you can't be outside your house making too much of a ruckus. The neighbors, and that's why Canada was so crazy during COVID. And then Justin Trudeau brought out policing lines, like rat on your neighbor.
Well, no wonder the trucker protest was
exactly. It's because there's so many repressed people there. They don't know what freedom is.
Well, they will.
They will.
Joking. But I don't know.
I'm saying astrologically, the Sun conjunct Uranus, they've been dying for freedom their whole life. And weird that Justin Trudeau came in 2015, which was the Pluto-Uranus square, finishing in the exact squares and oppositions to the Sun and Uranus in Cancer. 2014 with the Jupiter big cross with the Mars Retrograde in Libra, and that one was the year that was the dismantling of the Canadian world. To bring in Justin Trudeau to be the Trojan horse heiress in Aries over his moon right now. Right? I forgot. His moon's up there by Aries right now. The Trojan horses come in. And it was Justin Trudeau to bring it down. It is so insane. This was the best show. I love this. This is fucking too good.
Well, I'm glad that you enjoyed it.
So good. All these people, not true. Oh, yeah, okay. Well, when you become American one day, you'll realize, oh, shit, what's it like to actually just be myself fully without people looking at me weird or telling me be quiet. You're speaking too loud. My God. Unless you're in the city. The only place. And even there, I got in trouble for fucking taking pictures at the hotel. I got in trouble for fucking being outside and walking around in a suit and taking a picture. It's fucking insane there. The policing there by the people, staff at a restaurant, staff at a hotel. The grocery people are the most lonely people I've ever seen in my life, and the fucking people at every fucking gas station are the most sorriest people I've ever met, the most saddest people I've ever seen, and the most depressed people I've ever seen in my life. And I've been to every state in this whole entire America, right? And I've driven through it all. And I have it all on camera to prove it. And I've never been to a more sad place in my life. It's sad because they are great people, the nicest people in the world. But it's because look at just Jordan Peterson. Nicest guy in the world. You start speaking truth, you start bringing up stuff, we're going to take away your license. That is the darkest place right now because of a shadow that's not the people, but the shadow of the monarch that's created this false illusion of freedom in a country that is the farthest from free. The only thing that's free in Canada are the milk in a bag. And that's not free.
The milk in a bag?
Can be its own unique expression, right? They still drink milk from a bag in Canada. Oh. And lemmings in the sea.
Well, this was a wonderful tourism promotion for Canada. And here I had my beaver tail treat in Quebec City, and it was so much fun, but
what year?
It was in the district. I don't know.
What year was that?
It was maybe 2016 or something.
That was the year I was in Canada.
I was in a different part of Canada, though. You We're over there in the West. I mean, and I was there earlier too when I lived on the East Coast, and I drove up from that direction into Canada, and it was
So
but you
weird.
know what? I'm a Libra in Canada, and you're a Leo in Canada. Maybe that's the difference.
Yeah, like I'm going to talk. I'm going to ask you how you're doing to every single person. I'm going to be at a restaurant and be a Leo. Like, hey, let's get this, let's get that. I was nice. Even the waitress was like, I'm so sorry. Like, you guys are such nice people. Like, it's just Canada. I was like, man, this place is nuts. I remember being like, get me the fuck out of here. This place is crazy. It's crawling with subconscious repressed people. It's scary. Except in Alberta. Everybody I met from Alberta is the most real people, all the oil people, because that's the most conservative part, and that's where they do oil. People drive trucks. People don't give a fuck there. There's no woke. They tried to push woke stuff, but they also pushed up against the vax there, everything. Alberta is the one province that is the most relatable to America. So if anybody in the chat's all pissed, I get about Alberta. Alberta's the only place.
But why? This explains why hockey is so violent. They're just taking out all their anger in the game.
Yes, or why does every Canadian that's famous in America, which is a shit ton of them, whether it's Justin Bieber, the list goes on and on. Why do they come here? Because you can't be that in Canada. You can't live that way in Canada. No, yeah, and then even the financial system there. You want to send money somewhere? You just can't send money. The bank has to approve it, and they want to do their own approval, and you're not in control. The way Canada works is like a mafia, and it's gnarly. And then they make it seem like it's like they're spraying like Pinocchio dust in the air and making everybody feel like they're at Pleasure Island that's of like normal, everything's perfect and clean and nice, when really underneath is like, it's like the tunnels of Disney. You know? Crazy.
Well, I don't know what to say about that, but the tunnels of Disney would be a good show too.
Yeah.
So.
Like, I actually love that people in Canada are pissed. That's my whole point, is to get you to fucking fight for your freedom. And we saw that with the truckers, and that was Jupiter Neptune in Pisces 12th house, and that was the exposure with Chiron there. The wound, the deepest wound of Canada is its spiritual suppression of its expression of self with Neptune on the ascendant in Aries. And everybody in Canada wants to disrupt, but it's scary emotionally to do that. But when they get, this Mars retrograde is going to empower Canadians more than any other place. America, we know how to empower ourselves all the time. But Canada has it harder, being a sun in the fourth with Uranus in the fourth, and the moon balsamic in Gemini at 29 degrees with Neptune squaring it. It's a wake up. They're feeling emotions they never felt as a country. Like they always thought it would be the same, and it's not. It's diverse in weirder ways than they thought. Not DEI diverse, but the feeling and the overtone of how Canada was always supposed to feel. But it was under a conservative government that made it that way, not the crazy liberal one that Justin Trudeau brought in, Fidel Castro. But yeah, so anyway. It's a great show. I could go on for days.
Yes, it could, but we do have to stop.
Yep. Oh, and there are nodal flips coming. North node in Virgo, south node in Libra, or in Pisces. And the south node sits on the Chiron of Canada in Pisces in the 12th. Past life suppression. Jupiter retrograde in Pisces in the 12th, Neptune in the 12th. That is the deepest suppression of all countries in the world. Meaning there's so much greatness to be had there. Canadians should do the chart of their own country.
Well, that's why they keep astrologers out.
You know,
they don't want them doing that.
They don't want them knowing the truth. because the biggest pileup of planets through Pisces and Aries here in 2025 and the craziest of retrogrades and the nodal shifts and all that stuff are all happening in the 12th house over the Chiron of Canada. And they have a moon square Chiron natally in their chart. They don't even know that they're being victimized emotionally. So it's a country of victims that don't know that they're being victims. How wild is that? So we are highvibe.tv. Believe it or not, this is High Vibe Talking. Looking at things, you know, on a deeper level. I appreciate you, Ann, so much. I'm looking forward to this year. I feel this show's going to skyrocket the stuff we got.
I hope so. I'm looking forward to whatever we do next and our dreams for the future when we'll be touring castles in England.
Yes.
And telling them how to behave like Americans.
Yeah.
They'll need us.
Yeah, don't offer me tea. Where's the coffee? No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, I actually think that you're right. The monarch will not go, but I think it's going to have problems. I think William's got that pressure that Henry had. So, and he's going to go as Prince William, King William the First.
No.
Oh, who was it? What was the other William?
William the, oh my gosh, what?
Fifth?
Going to be the fifth? I think so.
Yeah, none of the Williams are really remembered.
But there was the Dutch William, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
William the Third. So, and that relates to some of the. I think he would have been a Pluto in Cancer or earlier than that. William the Third. I don't know. Or maybe it was in that era. He was like 16.
Didn't the Dutch line have the orange line, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think.
And Wilhelmina was the first queen of the new monarchs, Wilhelmina the First.
Yeah, interesting.
Been a lot of queens in Netherlands. It's been a king since 2013. He has 2 daughters, though. He didn't have any sons, so it's going to be a woman. And one of them is being fat shamed because she's so fat, the eldest daughter.
That's sad for her.
I'm Dutch, so I know all this stuff. But what if, for sure we're ending, what if Kate dies, unfortunately, from cancer, because the AI is already playing her part, and they have to expose it. And so with William, they go, well, you have the Dutch line. You have to marry the fat 21-year-old daughter of the Netherlands royal line to try and keep an alliance in Europe.
I don't think you're going to make that happen.
Oh, boy, 2025, I would be surprised.
Well, it's something I don't believe will happen, so it probably will. I don't know.
Right?
Sounds like we
the fat 21-year-old is trying to start a campaign about fat shaming, but she definitely needs to try and get, we don't want her to die. She's so overweight.
I don't know anything about this.
Oh, you don't know Dutch royalty? Oh,
no, I don't. I mean, I know they have that candy that looks like isn't there like this little this candy with Queen Wilhelmina on it?
Yes.
So that's about as much as I know about the royal.
Wilhelmina was an amazing queen. That's why my grandmother's name was Wilhelmina. She was named after that queen.
Well, I'm doing research right now on Queen Caroline of Ansbach, and her first name was actually Wilhelmina, but she went by Caroline. She became George II's wife. Mm-hmm. And they figured Caroline was easier to pronounce in England, so
right.
That's why she didn't go by Wilhelmina or Wilhelmina.
And I'm doing research on Edward IV and how he married Elizabeth Woodhull, right? That was her name? But he had 3 mistresses, and he had a child with another Elizabeth, Lucy, first. And his mother didn't want him to marry Woodhull, Elizabeth Woodhull, right? Because he already had a baby, which is my direct line, right? So Edward IV, my 20th great grandfather from the mistress that was supposed to be the queen, but then he chose different, right? But there's a lot of questions, and there was just new reporting by a historian showing it's true, because once Edward died, and then, Henry the Seventh married the daughter of Edward the Fourth, that Henry the Seventh wanted everything demolished about what happened, right?
That sounds typical of the
Right,
the Tudors.
right. But one of the pieces of paper was saved that proved it. So the question is, was it always that Elizabeth or not? And it's really weird because, that whole thing, it's really wild. And I know it's more connected to myself, but it's fucking gnarly because, that's my direct line in my line, one of my lines. And to her, and then she married this really big guy. I forgot his name at the moment. But, and then they had a kid, but it's really weird about the way that Edward the Fourth lived his life during the War of the Roses and all that shit, and
it was a crazy time.
And how many mistresses he had, but he did have children, and then it was the Tudor line that decided them not to be legitimate.
Yeah, they needed to end the civil wars. So sorry, otherwise you could be.
So it's interesting because historians right now are looking at the whole course of where the monarch is today could have been different.
Yeah.
If that didn't happen. And it's connected to me. I'm like, tell me right now I'd be sitting up there as a double Leo, as a prince right now?
You were meant to be.
That it was that choice by Henry the Seventh? That I'd be up there right now? Fucking weird. So, yeah. That's just that's a typical day in a Leo with a Mars retrograde in Cancer on the 12th.
Find out you're not king. Oh no.
Well, yeah, it's one of those things to where when you're planning your life here with God and you're like, okay, like you can't think of all of it.
You're going to be the most royal individual. You're going to have this wonderful chart. We're sending you to America, by the way. And sorry, but your ancestor was deposed for being too fertile.
Yeah, well, she was a Plantagenet or whatever, because she married
Plantagenet.
A Plantagenet. She married, yeah. But I'm direct of Richard the Bruce in the second, and he married Anne Stewart in 13.
So funny, and here
right. That's my direct line on my dad's side too.
That's not funny, but it was. What's funny is that over the weekend I was when I was researching Caroline, I came across this ancestry site. And I was actually trying to find out who is alive today that connects to the Hanoverian family. And I did find the prince and all of that. But I thought, oh, well, let me check in on my family and see if any more ancestors have been discovered. And it still goes back to they came to America in 1840 something. And we don't know who the father or mother is at a certain point. So I really
have me take a stab at it.
I need to do that. I need to get the international ancestry, because the issue is always when it goes to back to Germany, it was
the Germans kept records all the way going back to the 15th century, like 1400s.
I think it's for some reason I've got one ancestor who was around Hamburg, but northern, where it was sometimes Denmark and sometimes not Denmark, right? And that seems to be where that record stops. Like some record didn't get taken, or I don't know. Or they had to refute their citizenship or their subjecthood in one place. I don't know what happened.
Huh.
But yeah, I'll have to have you look at it.
I know, I would love to.
You have the magic touch where it just appears too.
Well, this doesn't appear. It's more, I've figured out how to find the record. So as long as you know the name of your great-great-great-grandfather and grandmother, where they were born, the last line that you know of, then I know how to find in the records the parents, right? Like in searches, by using the last name, by sometimes finding the mother or the father of one of them. And then once you get there, then you find how they connect through documents of other ones, and then, oh, you made it through that one. And then sometimes it becomes really easy, because once you get through that barrier, then you get into somebody who did have more records than somebody who didn't. You know, some people did, some people don't. But I think what we're going to see with Pluto and Aquarius is realizing people's lines, like where they're at in their life and their manifestations. It's whether or not you choose to be the one in your line that does something or not. So many, I just go through thousands, I have thousands in my tree, right? Thousands of my ancestors who just did nothing. It makes me so upset. I'm like, they had this, they had that as their parent. They were living in this castle. Nothing. And no, they didn't die at 5 years old. They died at 80 or 54 or whatever.
That was a big accomplishment.
And it just, like, you did nothing.
They stayed alive, and they had someone who had you eventually. So that was an accomplishment.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is. Now that I'm having a son, it's hard, because I'm like, shit, like it's been 1,000 years of male plumbers, right? Like, okay, thinking about the middle name and all that and how to name it all right, to carry on 1,000-year-old tradition is really gnarly.
You're not choosing Charles or William?
No.
Edward?
Because I'm named after my dad, or my grandfather, my grandfather's named after my dad, and like it always follows. Like mine is crazy. It's like, but then once you get to the 1500s, and then you get, it's just all Johns and Richards, right? And they all served with all the kings and we talk about, right? But once you get to the 1300s of the Palmer line, like that part of it, just the male Palmer that stayed, you get to Palmericus, Henricus, right? Like these kind of weird names, and then they get rid of dual names, and then you get to the Norman Knights, and they were with William the Conqueror. So it becomes kind of like, man, and then to go farther beyond that, I have to really hire a genealogist who can go find stuff during the time of the 800s and Charlemagne to connect to that, right? So I'm at that cliff that most people never get to, of like, I have to go into the 900s and the 800s, right?
Mine barely goes to the 18th
right?
century.
And that's scary, because I'm like, where does that go? But that's going to be the next part of my journey. And it's expensive. Do you know how much genealogy people make?
Yeah, it's
Fucking bank. I got in the wrong business.
what about me? I'm one step away from being able to do that. I should have been a genealogist, not a historian.
Talking like 40 hours for $10,000 without promise of anything.
Where are you finding these people? Through
90% of genealogists are based out of Utah, because all of the research is in Utah because of the Mormon Church. Right. There's a couple that kind of are little snake oil salesmen, like, were you adopted? We'll find your parents. Like, there's those ones. They don't live in Utah. They're just like, I'll figure it out. Right? It's like they're on a street corner, like, $500. You're adopted? You want to know who your real parents are? Like, I swear, I have done the research. It's crazy. But like the real ones that are at Brigham Young, that literally have access to all of the Mormon Church, because Mormon Church owns all the records. Fucking crazy. And I'm one that specializes in the British Isles, right? So that top tier money, like, crazy. I'm like, well, I mean, it's like my Mayflower Society genealogy. It's like you pay the membership, whatever, and they're kind of free, right? Because you have to have enough to show that you are, like I do, right? So it's like, okay, and they're kind of nice, and they give it to you, right? But like to get the British Isles stuff and to get them to talk to their genealogist they know over there, that's the fee that you're paying, is to be able to have access, unless you and I go and do it ourselves.
Yeah.
But we'll figure out yours, and then maybe we're dipping to Germany.
Yeah.
And I have plenty of German line on my Nana side, so.
Then you can explore your Indonesian side.
Yeah, I don't really know if I really want to go to China and Indonesia and Thailand and, those ancestors of mine, like, they were just, the ones that married the Dutch are the ones that have pictures because they married a white Dutchman. But when you go into the lines of like the pure Asian side of my life, like, it's nobody. They're doing pottery probably. Or the Ming Dynasty or something.
That would be exciting.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's a whole nother part of your life that you'll research one day.
Yeah. So, well, that's fun.
Yeah.
We will see you on the next one. Join us on highvibe.tv and on the apps. We have tons of shows. It's a great year because this is the craziest year of all time. I've said that for a long time. This would be the year. So we're doing it together on highvibe.tv and on the website and on the apps and in our community. We appreciate you and appreciate you very much, Ann, too. I know people love you,
I
too.
appreciate you, too. Thanks so much.
All right, everyone. Adios. Bye-bye. Bye.
Attention, please.
Yo. Okay.
Attention, please.